Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're reconvening day two on the general government's election subcommittee. We're hearing House Bill 316, and we're going to pick up pretty well where we left off yesterday. We have Cynthia Willingham from Rockdale County.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Cynthia Willingham. I am the supervisor of elections with Rockdale County. I am here first to say that as an election official, I am in support of House Bill 316, all parts of it. I do see great improvements for our voters. To ensure that if we don't find a voter on the voter roll, that there are provisions in this bill that will assist the voter. However, I am here also to talk about a new voting system for the state of Georgia. Rockdale County had the opportunity in November of 2017 to pilot a ballot marking system for the City of Conyers general municipal election. With that opportunity, we were the only county in the state to have that opportunity. And we were nervous. We were really nervous, but I can say for myself, I have worked in a large county for 21 years, managing elections. That was in Fulton. And I also, with Rockdale County, which is smaller, I've been there now since 2006. So I have the experience in managing elections. I have 30 plus years in the election field. I have worked as a budget analyst in elections. I have worked as a ballot builder, which encodes the ballot. I have also managed precincts, divided precincts, located polling places. Also, I have had the opportunity to work as secretary to the Board of Elections. So I've also have had the opportunity to manage voter registration. So for me, I am speaking from experience. Being selected by the state, we would, like I said, staff and I was nervous. We didn't know what a ballot marking system was, so we had to quickly play catch up. The election was scheduled for November 7th. Early voting was to begin mid-October. So we started preparations in September. Working with the vendor, we piloted the express vote system with the vendor ES&S. We met with ES&S, we met with the state. We talked about concerns that we would have, what would need to change. And in that, we started the process, which with any election, you start with the process of coding the ballot. I wanted to personally be involved with that process. We asked a lot of questions. The coding versus how we code the ballot on the DRE side was much simpler, very few steps. We then tested the system. We had to test the ballot marking device. We also had to test the scanners, which would record the votes of the voter. The ballot marking device itself, we looked at it once we understood it as just an electronic pen. It didn't store anything. It's an on and off button, where with the DREs, they actually store the votes. So when we open up a precinct for Rockdale County, we have 9 to 11 DREs in a precinct. For the City of Conyers, there were 2 precincts piloted. We sent 6 to 8 ballot markers to each precinct. So we tested a total of, I believe, 30 ballot marking device because we also had them for the early voting center. Participating in the logic and accuracy testing, it was much smoother. And like I said, with the ballot marking devices, you don't have to do all the testing that we do on DREs that stores the votes. The component that stores the votes is the scanners. So we went through a full testing there. We went through the testing on the ballot markers to make sure when we selected a candidate that it recorded that vote as selected. And that's what we're required to do with any system in the state of Georgia. So we did that. It took us a day and a half to do the testing. And once testing was done and it was open to the public, we didn't have anyone to attend, we started planning for the education of our voters as well as training of the poll workers. We contacted our poll workers. We let them know what was going on. They were actually excited. And we actually thought that we would lose poll workers, but we did not. They were nervous too, but we did put them at ease. The voter education side of it was that we asked the vendor to provide us with units that, ballot marking units that we can take on the road throughout the community and demonstrate how to use the ballot markers. We went to senior centers. We went to homeowners association meetings. We went to our board meetings. Anybody that would allow us to come, we took the equipment. In addition, we were able to demonstrate this system to our local delegates along with our congressperson. And this was for Rockdale and DeKalb. Now, the key here is that it was interesting because when we set the demonstration units up in our office, and we publicized information that the units would be used for the city election. Not only did we get city voters, we also have voters that were not eligible to vote in the city election to actually come and test the system out. Not only did they do that before Election Day, but they also did it during early voting and on Election Day. Always we get, for city elections, we have voters that are upset that they can't vote in the city election. And we always tell them, well, you have to live in the city. But this time, voters were truly, truly interested in the election. So we demonstrated this system as much as possible. Our concerns were when we went from the paper ballot or punch card system to DREs, we wanted to make sure that we did due diligence in educating the voters. What we found, though, in educating the voters is that most voters felt comfortable and just showing them how to insert the ballot into the ballot marker. They felt that's all the assistance that they needed. They knew how to make their selections on the screen. Still nervous about it. Our first day of early voting, we brought in extra staff to actually work with the voters. We had demonstration units available to walk the voter through before they actually went in to vote. Well, most of the voters declined our help. They said that they were comfortable with the system, and most said, well, I know how to use an electronic voting system. I've been voting for years. But what voters did need help on was how to guide the paper ballot into the ballot marker system. After that, no other assistance was needed. However, guidance was needed, and that was telling the voter which station to go through once they marked their ballot. So we did have additional staff there to make sure, number one, that no one walked out of the precinct with the ballot. So we did that. Poll worker training. with our poll workers, like I said, they were excited to take part in testing a new system. So they came in with open minds, open hearts, and they rolled up their sleeves and they were ready to train. We started the training. It was a 3-hour training. Majority of the training was dedicated to showing the voter the ins and outs of the system and how to open and close a precinct, how to deal with any challenges such as if a ballot is jammed. So we went through all the troubleshooting processes. At the same time, we were working out how are we going to deliver this equipment to the precincts. If you all remember the ballot markers, they're little small devices. They're not as big as the DREs. So we worked out a plan that I was satisfied with on how to deliver the equipment as well as how we were going to secure the equipment, because as you know, with the DREs in Rockdale, we deliver the equipment. There are daisy chain as required by law, so that if someone attempt to take the equipment, you got to take all of them. Well, with the ballot markers, we were not able to do that. And so what we did, we stored them in a secured room that evening, the evening before the election. And the next day when the poll workers went in to set up, they had to get the units and bring them in. That's one of the challenges that they noted, is that let's come up with a better process of how we are to bring the units into the voting room. And we thought about it, and we thought maybe putting all the units on one cart and rolling the cart into the room may help. So those are things that if we move to this type system, that would have to be worked out. But the poll workers enjoyed the training classes. There were lots of smiles, and they were ready. So October 21st, we started the early voting process. Now, what we did in Rockdale County, the same workers that would work in the 2 precincts on election day, we used those same workers for early voting. And that was to familiarize them and get them comfortable with the system. And we also brought in additional workers, but we used majority of the workers that would work on election day. The first day, the vendors were there. They were there to assist. But after the first day, the poll workers were very comfortable, very comfortable. Within 5 minutes, they were open, and within 5 minutes, they were closed. And at the end of the day, they were ready to go. And each day through the early voting process, they came in, they opened the precinct, they closed, and they did not need assistance from the vendor. So during the early voting process, they had the opportunity to experience a paper jam. And through that process, they were prepared for election day, that if this happened, they knew how to readily resolve the problem. So early voting went on without any problems. They noted to me that the open and close process was the biggest improvement for the system. We know that on election night, we're waiting on results. Poll workers have to go through a lengthy process of closing out. With the additional staff that we used through the early voting, as I stated, they were there simply to help guide the voter. But as I stated, many of the voters did not require anyone to actually assist them, but just to guide them through the next step. On election day, we opened our polls. The vendor was there as support, but the poll workers were able to independently open each of the polling places and close without any problems. We did not get any calls with problems throughout the day. There were no system shortages. There were no lines. The poll workers started the process to close the precinct at 7 p.m. and by 7:30, both precincts had already checked into the check-in center. talking with the poll workers, they stated that it was far easier to close down the ballot markers than it was with the DREs. With each DRE, you can have in our precincts up to 9 to 11 DREs, and you have to run 3 tapes from each one of those units. And the poll workers have to sign them. With the ballot markers, it was just an on-off button that you press. They didn't have to run any tapes. Like I said, in most of the precincts, we had 6 to 8 units in the precinct. They were able to just go through assembly style, cut each unit off. The closeout was done on the tabulators. We had 2 in the precinct. The poll workers were able to close out the tabulators with the vendor actually just observing. And they were comfortable with it. They were able to seal all the units before bringing the USB drive. Instead of memory cards that are used in the DREs, it's actually a USB drive. And they were able to pull that USB drive and seal it in an envelope and deliver it to the check-in center along with all the other supplies. Security of the system was important for us to make sure that we covered. We made sure that at the ballot marking station and at the tabulation, the scanner system, and I use the term tabulator because I've been in this business forever, but the scanners, which I have to now get used to new terminology as well as the workers, but we had individuals stationed near the scanners. So that again, when you make sure no one walked out, but also you make sure that the system, no one is tampering with the system. So being observant in the precinct was important for us on election day, as well as in the early voting center. The poll workers arrived at our office, like I stated, around 7:30, and while we were waiting on the poll workers to arrive, the law allow us to start the closing process on the in-person early votes and mail ballots. So we started the tabulation process of that at 7 p.m. By 7:15, the first results were already uploaded, and we gave out the reports, and we provided reports to the state of those results for in-person early voting as well as mail. So it was a really, really easy process, just taking the USB drive out of the scanner and uploading it to the ElectionWare system that actually give us a report of the results. We verified the results, made sure that the number of people that voted matched the number of votes that were recorded. That's part of the reconciliation for any system that we used. Once the precincts arrived and checked in, and we verified that the envelope that the USB drives were stored in had not been tampered with, we were able to check everything in and also upload those results. The poll workers arrived at 7:30. By 8:15, we were done. Everything was done, results reported, verified. We actually had the public there. We had a room full of people. We had a highly contested mayor's race, and it was a room full of people. And I could tell you, deep down, I was on pins and needles. I was like, Lord, let these results come out right. And they did. But just going through the processes, everything worked great for us. There are improvements that we can make to the system. Thinking about some of the process that we went through, the paperwork had to be changed, such as the recap sheet, because we have a DRE recap sheet, but with the Paladin system, you won't need to record numbers from each unit that the voter marked their ballot with, because nothing is stored there. So it'll just be 2 tabulators. So we created a recap sheet, and felt comfortable with it. But I'm pretty sure that if we go with a ballot marking system, we will make improvement on the forms themselves. One of the things I want to make sure that should we go with the ballot marking system, that number one, voter education remain a key component of it, in addition to an implementation schedule. If we're talking about maybe using the system come March 2020, allow us enough time where we can not only election officials are trained, but as well as we do voter education, and we're prepared come March. So I ask that an implementation, a timely schedule be put in place. Now, I've heard stories, I've read stories as a Safe Commission. I've read reports about cybersecurity and the concerns. I've read every report that was sent to me. And one of the reports from one of the cybersecurity experts stated that there are possible vulnerabilities with the current voting system, although none has been proven, none has been found. This is in the report that was sent to me as a Safe Commission member. First, possible vulnerabilities, and then the next statement that none had not been found. We've been on this system for 17 years. The reason that none have been found is because as election officials, we are committed to what we do. We're committed to securing the system. We are committed to fairly treating our voters. And we're dedicated to accessibility. And we're dedicated to making sure that as election officials, we ensure that there's no tampering with this system. Regardless of what system that you all provide for us, we're going to make sure that it's secure. That's our job. And I do believe that that's why there have not been any cases, is because when you all approve for DREs, one of the things that are in the law stated that this system shall not have any connectivities to the internet, no software for internet. Our electionware system, there are only 3 files on there. The electionware system, you have a file where we can create CDs, and we have a way on the system, and it leaves me the third piece of software. But there is nothing on there that gives you accessibility to the internet, and it should remain that way. There's no network connectivities whatsoever. It should be a standalone system that the only thing we do is receive the results on that system. I think it should remain that way. We have, as a region, polled every region in the state, polled our election officials, and 100% state that they support moving our state forward to a ballot marking system with a voter verifiable paper receipt, where the voter themselves can look at their ballot, look at their selection, and verify it. Every county we have polled, they are in support of that. In closing, again, Rockdale County, we support House Bill 316. Like I said, there were challenges. You have paper jams. We just have to be trained on how to fix them. Storage and security of the ballot markers once we deliver them to the precinct would be a challenge that we would need to work out. And as well as I stated, even for myself, a change in terminology. Those are things that we just have to adjust to. We adjusted when we went from punch card to paper ballots. And I think we will adjust to whatever system that we move to for 2020. I thank you for your time, and if I'm here to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Cynthia. Mr. Turner.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony and being here today and for volunteering. I know it must have been nerve-wracking, the experience to take that on. The spotlight must have been so big on you. With that in mind, did any voter complain during, you may not be aware, but are you aware, any voters complaining that their paper ballot didn't match the touchscreen results that they had cast their ballot?
We did not have any. We did not have any voters to complain. As a matter of fact, as I stated, we had workers stationed at the stations, and we were providing to the voter once their ballot came back out with their selection to verify your ballot. We couldn't look at their ballot because their vote's supposed to be by secrecy. We provided to the voter that if it say no selection, that means you didn't vote for something. Make sure that if it says no selection, then that race you did not want to vote for anyone. If there is anything different on your ballot that you're not satisfied with, let us know, and we can spoil that ballot and give you another ballot.
So if there were instances of that happening?
We had none. No.
Were there any instances that you're aware of voter confusion as a result of, I thought I was going to vote this way, or I came in to vote for something specific, it's not on there? Or anything like that?
We had no situations like that. And like I said, we had people stationed there. It was odd that I remember a situation. We had an 85-year-old lady come in to vote. And, you know, sometimes we look at them as our grandma. Well, I am a grandmother, but we look at them as our grandmothers, right? And we want to just help them along the way. And when the worker explained to the voter that we can take you over to the demonstration unit and show you how to vote your ballot, she said to my worker, honey, I've been voting as long as you've been in this world. And my worker stepped off. So, excuse me. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just want to make sure I understood your testimony, which I think was that as a member of the Safe Commission, that you read all the correspondence and emails from experts who expressed concerns about the security of ballot marking devices. Is that right?
That's correct.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to hand you a letter. Mr. Chairman, I have letters, copies of the letter that I've handed that I would ask to be distributed to the members of the committee. And the letter's dated January 7, 2019. And have you seen this letter before? Is this one of the letters that you referenced having read?
This is during the early parts of information that we received. I won't say that I recall everything here. I received over 1,000.
Sure.
When I tell you over 1,000, but I'm pretty sure that we did receive it. They provided Safe Commission with just about every correspondence that came through, and I'm pretty sure I probably read over it or received a phone call about it.
So let me just ask in general terms. Have you ever heard about this letter? Is a letter from 24 cybersecurity experts in the country, and have you ever heard of the existence of this letter that was signed or from 24 cybersecurity experts across the country, including professors at Georgia Tech, who were expressing a concern about the security issues associated with ballot marking devices.
And not only did I hear about, I read it also in the news. I kept up with news articles as well, because sometimes in the news articles you get a different point of view. And so the answer is yes, I did see that. However, one thing I want to point out when we talk about these reports, in some of those same reports, the example of systems that have vulnerabilities, one example was Home Depot, another system was Equifax. Two things that those two have in common. These are systems that are available online, accessible online via the internet. They have customers. I don't call my voters customers, okay? Some may do, but these are people where these systems, if you look at every report where they gave examples, they were systems that were available online. The voting system is not available online. And that, to me, were the difference and the disconnection I felt between the two.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if I might, just in the second paragraph of this letter, the conclusion is that their strong recommendation is to reject computerized ballot marking devices as an option for Georgia's system, except to accommodate voters with disabilities, and that prevent them from hand marking paper ballots, and hand marked paper ballots scanned by modern optical scanners used in conjunction with the risk limiting post-election audits of election results should be the standard balloting method statewide. And I guess understand what you're saying, but that seems fairly unequivocal to me.
Well, what I would say to that is that one thing I was disappointed with about these reports is that neither one of these cybersecurity experts came to talk with us as election officials. I have 30 plus years in this field. I have coded ballots, I have built ballots for the most populous county in this state, and that's Fulton County. So for me, with the cybersecurity experts, they only went from what information they had. They have never worked in our office coding a ballot. They did not come and talk with any of us as election officials. I was disappointed with that, and I'm being honest. I was truly disappointed because reports were written, but no one asked us.
Mr. Chairman, if I might ask, and I guess this is what I'm struggling with. I'm just a small town lawyer in a town less than 1,000 people. I don't pretend to be a cybersecurity expert, but I'm looking at a letter from 24 cybersecurity experts from across the country, and it says there's a material risk to ballot marking devices. And I hear your testimony, and I guess what I'm trying to ask is, seems like I ought to listen to the 24 cybersecurity experts from across the country on the issue of cybersecurity.
Well,
Why shouldn't we do that?
Well, that would be disappointing for me with my 30 plus years in the field and being someone that have coded ballots and built ballots from scratch. That would be disappointing for me and from us as election officials that you would go with cybersecurity experts who have never one day worked with our system. But we work with this system every day. So to say that to me respectfully, that would be disappointing.
Mr. Chairman, one final question. Is there anybody who is a credentialed expert in the field of cybersecurity that offered testimony to the Safe Commission in support of ballot marking devices?
What I would say to that is there isn't anyone. However, again, when you talk about cybersecurity experts, look at their reports. They talk about systems that are accessible to the public. Our system is not. So yes, those systems can be hacked. I'm not saying that our voting system cannot be hacked, but what I'm saying, if we, along with the cybersecurities, we work together to make sure that our system is not compromised, then yes, we can have a secured system. The EAC chairman just gave a report to Congress in January, and he was asked specifically, were there any compromise to our system during the 2018 election? And his answer in writing was no. And I can provide that report to you in writing, as well as his comments are also on YouTube.
Mr. Galley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate your years of service in elections, and I served on our Board of Elections in my county. I know that this is a thankless job. No one says elections went well. The only time that people usually say anything about elections is when something doesn't go well. An argument was made to me recently that when we're having people like yourself, people with years of experience in elections, looking at this, looking at the different tools available for elections, that you're making this decision based on what makes your life easier. How would you respond to that?
When I think about what makes it easier to us as election officials, it's what's convenient, what's fair, what's secured for the voter. It's never about making our work easier. It's never about making our work easier. If it was about making our work easier, many of us would not have stayed in the field as long as we have. We could have gone to do different jobs. Like I said, I was a budget analyst in elections. I very well could have went down the accounting field. So this isn't about making our jobs easier. This is just about moving us towards the future. We have to remember, all of us that are in this room, 10 to 20 years from now, we may not be doing the job that we do. I don't plan to. I'll be retired. But the hands that we leave this system into, we want to leave them with something that they can improve on for the future also. And we know with our millennials, we know with our seniors, it used to be we couldn't find poll workers because they were not computer literate. But guess what? Even seniors have tablets. Everybody, that's not one of the criteria that we have to go through to say we can't find poll workers because they don't have that experience. So technology is going to be here. We're either going to be left behind, and when we leave this system in the hands of those that come after us, I want to make sure that we've done all that we can, number one, to leave a great system to them. That they're not, as one voter said to me, why are y'all going all the way back to paper? And what she called it was caveman years. I didn't really agree about caveman years because then it'll talk about my age. But what I said to her is that voters have said that they like electronic voting, but they want a piece of paper in their hand. And I think what this bill would do, it would accomplish just that. So we have to think about what we're going to leave for our future voters. And it's not about convenience. It's really not about convenience.
Thank you. One more, Mr. Chairman. You said that by 7:30, so polls close at 7 o'clock. Mm-hmm. By 7:30, you'd already, or the two polling locations that had these machines had already checked into the elections office or turned in. Is that normal? In the past, when we had DREs, would that have been normal?
Not at all. Not at all for these two precincts.
Right.
That's not norm. That's not the norm, because you have to remember we have all the tapes to print. They have to post those tapes on the door. They have to do the paperwork and so forth. So just to close down of the voting units itself, it takes 30 to 45 minutes alone just to close down those precincts. So we usually get our first precinct in between about 7:45-ish. And that's a precinct that's really close to the office.
Gotcha. One more, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry. The lines were shorter. You stated, I believe, is that correct? Did you believe you said that the lines were shorter?
Right.
Okay.
And I didn't. And I apologize. that I did not do this. I did not give the results of the city election, and I should have did that. We did not experience any long lines on election day, nor that we experienced any during early voting.
That's a contested race, a highly contested race.
Highly contested race. With city elections for Rockdale County, with the city election, we say it for this election, we had a record number turnout. Now, you all may not agree when you hear the results, but it is a record number turnout. Of the 7,681 registered voters that were eligible to vote, 1,054 actually voted. Usually, we have no more than 200-300 people to vote in the city election. Absentee by mail was 16 ballots. Election day at the polls, 668 ballots. In-person voting, 370, and we had no provisional voters.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Mrs. Willingham, but I'd like a clarification from Mr. Trammell, first of all. Mr. Trammell, can you tell me something about Harry Hursty?
All I can tell you is he's a signatory to the letter.
Do you know anything about him? Besides that, I guess the answer is no. Are any of these people in the letter you've handed out here today? Okay, there's one here, and maybe he'll testify later.
Counsel, I'm not.
In the letter it says in the second paragraph, and you read it, except when needed to accommodate voters with disabilities. That's when they don't recommend hand-marked ballots. So you're admitting by handing this out that you support forcing disabled voters to use a different machine than everybody else.
Representative, I don't think that. I think that
What
we
machine
have
are
a
they going to use?
responsibility.
Then?
We have responsibility as the state to accommodate voters under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
And under this letter you've handed out, they'd have to use a different machine than the one they're recommending for everybody else. Isn't that true?
It says that in the case when they are unable to mark a hand-marked paper ballot, they are saying that would be the only time where one would be an option.
I think you just answered yes, but I wouldn't want to admit it either, so I understand your hesitancy. Ms. Willingham, my question,
I think the letter speaks for itself.
and I'm speaking to you. Ms. Willingham, my question for you was, in the good explanation you gave us of the test run that you did with, that you described, did your handicapped voters, if you had any, would they have been required to vote on a different type machine than everybody else?
If we were only using a ballot marking system, the answer is no.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would it also be appropriate for, may I ask Leader Trammell a question with regards to the letter that was just handed out? Just what it contemplates, or is that appropriate at another time?
Happy to answer. Mr. Chairman, let me just say, Mr. Chairman, that if people want to take shots at any individual signatory to the credential, I certainly, it's certainly the purview of any representative on this committee. But what I find disturbing as a member of this subcommittee is the notion that we would discount expert testimony in any form from across the country on the issue. But I'm happy to answer the gentleman's question.
Ms. Willingham has just given us her years of experience in this area. I think if you and I were in court, I would qualify her as an expert. Aren't you discounting her advice that she's just given to us?
So let me answer this question thusly. If we were in court, I would have subpoenaed this expert testimony from these 23 witnesses, which is a member of the minority party of this committee. I do not have subpoena power to bring expert testimony to this proceeding.
Mr. Trammell, will you hold on just a minute? Now, the chair has given a lot of diligence to a lot of the actions. but this is a committee meeting. This isn't a recreational sport. If you could keep your applause to yourself so that these people can talk. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Trammell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're comparing apples to oranges here. This isn't a trial, though it certainly feels like the experts who are in support of the notion that hand-marked paper ballots are the most secure method of voting in Georgia are on trial. But as you can see, many of these are from out of state. With respect to the lady's testimony, I mean, I certainly agree with respect to the conduct of elections. She has lots of experience on the issue of the conduct of elections and can speak to that issue. But what these experts are speaking to is the risk of one system versus another system. And quite frankly, you know, they are in a superior position to offer testimony about that. And if we were in court and testimony was offered by somebody on the issue of cybersecurity, you and I both know that no judge in Georgia should permit testimony without credentials in the expert field of cybersecurity.
Ms. Willingham, I consider you an expert in the area of elections, and I, for one, appreciate you being here today, and I appreciate the work that you've done. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I just might, you know, we can use words, and what you said is absolutely true. You have experience in elections and can speak as an expert in the conduct of elections. That is not cybersecurity. And all this letter says, and all I'm saying, is that cybersecurity experts have definitively opined on which method of voting is superior.
Mr. Blackman, are you?
I didn't know if I still got to ask a question or
Well,
not.
I mean, the mic is still for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Leader Trammell, all I wanted to ask, having read this, I was not sure if it contemplated a ballot marking device that might print off a readable format that was also identifiable to the voter, such as the names are printed and then the scanner would then scan those names versus a barcode or a QR code. Does this letter contemplate, or have they contemplated that, or do you know? And I that's the only question that I had, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that, you know, it's an excellent question, and I think that the letter speaks for itself as to the contours of that. I don't think it goes into an examination of one type of ballot marking device versus another. However, again, the letter clearly opines that ballot marking devices present a cybersecurity risk in any form, and that the gold standard that the state should adopt is hand-marked paper ballots. Now, this committee obviously is free to reject the expert advice of these cybersecurity experts, but that's what they say in this letter.
Yes, sir. I would just like to say that I don't see as it contemplates that particular way of printing a ballot. That's just my having read this shortly, and it could be wrong. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Blackman. All right. Any other questions from any of the committee members? If not, we thank you for taking your time to be here today.
Thank you all.
All right. Folks, I feel the chair is looking at the list, and now that we've just gone through an hour, I'm thinking that we're going to probably have several days at the rate we're going. So if I could encourage the speakers to be a little bit more forthcoming. First up, Joseph Kirk. And behind Mr. Kirk would be Harvey Sofo. If you might could be ready to come up right after Mr. Kirk.
Thank you very much. My name is Joseph Kirk. I'm the election supervisor in Bartow County, Georgia. I have a degree in computer science from the University of Georgia. I've worked in multiple jurisdictions throughout my career. I helped put the system here in Georgia. I helped put one similar to it in Mississippi, and I've held my position since 2007 in Bartow County. I'm here today to speak in favor of ballot marking devices for every voter, as well as specifically in favor of the current House Bill 316. I'd like to start by talking about audits. You know, the bill addresses that towards the end, and these are critically important to us moving forward. The audits need to be done on the human readable portion of the ballot. They need to be done by hand, and that will keep us safe. No matter what system we move forward with, if we're verifying people's vote that they verified themselves, or had the opportunity to verify themselves, after the fact, before certification, and make sure that's right, that will protect us from any sort of problems that may occur. This allows us to focus on the big picture, on the overall voting experience, on voters with disabilities, as has been discussed, on the ongoing costs that the local jurisdictions will have to bear. Because although a ballot marking device system is more expensive on the front end, the ongoing costs for a hand-marked paper ballot system will be a lot more for the local jurisdictions. Again, the key moving forward to these successful audits will be they're done on a human readable portion, and there is no question to the voter's intent. If we start auditing and realize, well, the machine misread this, even though the new scanners are better at that, there still could be problems. That will throw off the audit and cause a larger audit, cause a full hand count in many cases. I would much prefer as an election administrator to never have to make the decision of does this person vote for candidate A, candidate B, or for neither. That should be clear when they cast their ballot. The last thing I'd like to say is that time is of the essence here. If we want the system in place by the presidential preference primary in 2020, we've got to get working on this as quickly as possible. As Cynthia pointed out, we have to educate the public. We have to educate our poll workers. We have to educate ourselves in this new method of voting. So the more time we have to work on that, the better off we're all going to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time. Harvey Sofo. Next in line would be Ms. Nugent. Fee Nugent would be next.
First of all, my name is Harvey Soto. Sorry for my handwriting. I represent the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials as its policy analyst and civic engagement coordinator. I also want to say one of my colleagues said that the monitors on the side are not on. They were requesting if they can turn on the TV monitors on the side. Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that as Galeo, we see some very good and major improvements with HB 316 that has been made with regards to allowing people access to the ballot, this especially assistance when they are at the polling booth. Section 30 of the bill pertinently says that any person who requests assistance can do so with a person of their choice. No longer has to be someone who's a family member or someone close to kin. That means any person who has that language ability can help that person at the ballot, which makes a more and better informed electorate, and we do approve of that. Section 35 also states, if I'm not mistaken, Section 35 also allows, Section 30 allows for also absentee ballots to be turned in by people who can assist, as long as they're not someone who is the person's employer or a union representative. So we believe that that will help out, especially the Latino community who have different issues with access to the ballot. However, we do have a lot of questions on Section 6 when it regards to the exact match system. When someone registers to vote and the system is checked back with a driver's services system or the Social Security Administration. We have seen in the past, especially this past election, there are numerous Latino voters who had to reapply or who had to go through another system or another process to be able to finally get on the ballot, where they were put in pending status because they had hyphenated names, because they couldn't find them in the system, or sometimes they were newly naturalized, which is very unfortunate because these new citizens, having gone through a great experience of becoming Americans, now have to wait even longer or are not sure if they can vote in their first ever election, and it kind of sows that doubt of whether are they real full Americans or not after years of going through the process and finally becoming members of our society, right? Again, this exact match system does not fix the concerns of the federal judges after many hearings that were had right before the November elections. Please revisit that, see what the judges have said regarding the fixes that have gone with that, because we do not want to re-encounter this litigation that is going on that costs taxpayer money to support the exact match system. Again, there are some small improvements with it, but the system itself is very flawed. With going back to Social Security Administration, that does not update in time, that is not accurate, and it hurts a lot of the Latino voters who are new citizens or who have different names, hyphenated names or second last names, sometimes 3 last names, because of our culture. So again, the other question is, there is the system in Section 6 specifically that allows for registrars to double check if there have been any data entry errors. This is a great move. My biggest question is, for larger counties, where will the funding be for extra staffing to do this? Gwinnett is a very, very fast-moving county. Its electorate has expanded greatly, and especially myself as a Gwinnett citizen, I have seen that they pour thousands of man-hours every election, and if there is no funding to support that, how will the system be able to provide solutions for people who are requesting to become voters on our rolls? There will be a backlog, and that's unfortunate if the person does not get their voter card in time before elections. With that being said, lastly and finally, Section 7 of the bill, we just want to make sure that that portion where it says that you will come into an agreement with other states and share that information. Our biggest concern is when someone is disqualified under that section, will that information be public? So be made public, so that ourselves as Galeo and representing the Latino community can check that system from the Secretary of State and be able to help the voter better say, oh, this is why you were neglected, or this is why you disqualified from our voter rolls. Let's help you fix it, and that way we can better make some determinations moving forward. Besides that, thank you for your time, and I'm here for any questions.
No questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Nugent. I'm sorry.
Is it on? My question is, will HB 316 fix these racial disparities?
Which part are you specifically describing?
The part when you were talking, well, it might not be for you to answer, it might be for Chairman Flemings to answer, based on what you were talking about the exact match. And so I was just wondering if HB 316 will fix those.
So specifically with Section 6, what I'm speaking about, it will not fix those.
Okay.
It will not fix the issue regarding the hyphenated last names, and of course the newly naturalized citizens, who are, a lot of them are Latino, who have that issue, that they were put into a pending list when they were trying to register to vote. And a lot of them, especially those who are new to the American system of voting, are waiting for something in the mail to say that, oh, yeah, you are qualified to vote, not understanding that in our system we are more electronic. You can just check online to get that system. It poses an extra barrier to get on the voting rolls. And we've seen that's actually the real big issue. Sometimes it's not just voting machines, but having access to that ballot, to that voter roll for American citizens, regardless of race or national origin. Section 6 may prove another barrier that we want it to be fixed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Williams.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I go back to the days of a lady by the name of Linda Beasley. She was elections director under Secretary of State Kathy Cox. And she was very adamant to help people vote and make sure they could vote. Now, under this Bill 316, it's not going to stop the confirmation notice. So we've got to keep the lines of communication open with the people, the new citizens, when they register to vote, whether it's in getting their driver's license or going online to register, which with your iPhone, you can register to vote. And I mean, that technology is awesome. But after you register, then we have to be sure and instruct the voter to watch their mail for that confirmation notice. And if they don't get it within a couple of weeks, then let's go back through the process. We need to reach back out to someone, go online electronically, or fill out another application to make sure that we get them on the rolls.
I agree. The bill itself does have more provisions for extra notices, advanced notices to be made so that that can be corrected. I, of course, would prefer for the system itself to be fixed so that doesn't have to happen.
Right.
It would save our registrars and our election officials time, money, and resources when it comes to printing and sending out those messages and those staffing hours that are crucial. I myself, again, with the fastest growing county in Gwinnett,
Yeah.
which I'm very happy to be part of, I've seen working with Lynn Lefford how much work goes into that, and I really appreciate that work. And I'll, for her sake, like for the system, the exact match system, to be improved upon or just not be in place, right? So that notice doesn't have to be sent out and the person has to go through an extra step. They should get a card in the mail that says, "Congratulations, new American, you can now vote."
Right.
And this is where you go vote, and this is the information. That's what I would like to see. I do understand that the notices is a great improvement, but I think it doesn't solve the underlying issue, which is that sometimes the notices are not as nice.
Well, we certainly don't, we want it to be nice, and we want those people to be eligible to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll keep working to improve that system. But thank you for helping them, and thank you for being here.
I appreciate your time. I just want to help make sure everyone has the right to vote as easy as possible.
Good, and that's what we want. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, number 24, Todd Jones. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, do you have a second?
Absolutely. I just wasn't sure.
First of all, I share your goal. 100% participation by people who are truly eligible to vote, no matter what race they are, what nationality they are, whether or not they're American-born citizens or whether or not they were naturalized into our country. But there's a couple of things that I just want to, and I say this also to the ladies' question, and I just want to make sure also that there's an awareness on your group's part. 3 bits of data, and for those of you who know me, you know that I'm the IT geek. So a couple things. One, in the governor's race in 2014, there were about 2.5 million votes cast. In this recent gubernatorial race, it was 4 million. The state only grew by about 600,000, of which we estimate about 300,000 were adults. About 300,000 were below 18, so obviously not. So we had a net gain of about 300,000 potential voters, but a net gain of 1.5 million voters. Were you aware of that inside of the 14 to 18 gubernatorial race?
I'm very aware of the growth of the turnout, which is absolutely amazing for our democracy.
Yep.
I also know there was a 25% increase in the Latino turnout regarding 2014, 2018. And considering that our electorate has grown about 40% above that.
Yeah.
So what that's saying is that we're having a larger electorate and also a larger turnout. That is because of groups like mine and other groups that go out and tell people, hey, you're important, and also people want to be part of this democracy. My issue is not with the turnout. My issue is just making sure that systematically, when a person gets something in the mail, it should be a congratulations.
Sure.
You're on the rolls. If they're an eligible voter, of course.
Yep.
But there are eligible voters that are having to wait another week or wait a little bit of extra time, not knowing whether they are going to be on the rolls or not. And they are American citizens, right?
No,
just because of a hyphenated name or because of a outdated naturalization process.
I understand that. So let me, just for the chair's time, let me just go ahead and give you just 2 more things to be thinking about. From the SOS site, the Secretary of State's site, which as we all know, that's basically the mother lode of election data. Hispanic registrations between 14 and 18 were up 66.9%. Voter participation with Hispanics was up 229.6%. African American registration was up 15.1%, but voter participation was up 52.5%. If we baseline that against Caucasians, registration was only up 7.7%, and voter participation was up 41.1%. So clearly, to your point, we had much greater registration, much greater participation, and isn't that ultimately what we want inside the democracy? I think when you talk about Section 6, what we're looking at is we're going to do everything we can, to your point, to ensure that we have eligible voters. At some point, we need to have some safeguard, right? We can't just open up, the quote gates. So the idea of matching it up against the last 4 digits of the social security number, matching it up possibly against a driver's license, and then to your point, we appreciate you saying the extra notice around the 30 to 60 days is going to help that. I think I hear what you're saying is we need to find a way to make it a little bit more amicable, and we get that, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Ms. Nugent. Wynn.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Fee Nguyen, and I am the Litigation Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. I want to start by continuing the conversation on Section 6 of the bill, which proposes amendments to Georgia's exact match protocol. This protocol currently freezes voter registrations if the applicant's identity data does not exactly match the data in the Department of Driver Services database or the Social Security Administration database. This exact match protocol has a long and tortured history in this state and has been repeatedly demonstrated to this body and to the Secretary of State's office to be inherently flawed, to result in a high level of false mismatches or no matches, and to severely and disproportionately burden the right of people of color to vote in this state. And I want to remind you of some of that history. In 2008, a version of the exact match protocol failed to pre-clear under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. In 2010, a later version did pre-clear, but this version became the subject of litigation filed by several civil rights organizations, including Advancing Justice Atlanta, in 2016. And the reason why this litigation was filed is because during a 2-year period from 2013 to 2016, this protocol kicked almost 34,000 voters off the rolls, and 76% of them were voters of color. Now, that litigation ended in a settlement with the Secretary of State that restored thousands of voters back to the rolls. However, on the heels of that settlement, this body chose to codify exact match into law in 2017. And once again, civil rights organizations, some of them the same ones, have taken the Secretary of State to court because this version of exact match still negatively and disproportionately impacts people of color. Right before the 2018 midterm elections, there was an estimated 53,000 voter registration applications that were in pending status because of exact match, and 80% of those voter registrations belong to people of color, 70% of them Black. So I think what this history makes clear is that the amendments proposed by this bill offer Band-Aid solutions that fail to actually address the heart of the issues with exact match that have now been raised in 2 different lawsuits against the Secretary of State's office. One of them is still pending. Most critically, with respect to Section 6, what it still allows exact match to do is it still allows the bill, or it allows the law to reject facially complete and completely accurate voter registration applications, and based on a matching protocol that we know is flawed. We know it's flawed. There's been reports about how flawed it is. And we know that it disproportionately creates problems for people of color. And the other thing that the bill does not address is that the onus is still primarily on the voter who gets flagged, sometimes through no fault of their own. This onus is still on them to fix the problem. I do commend the proposed amendment that would require the Board of Registrars to actually check for data errors or other errors that contribute to the issue. However, What that amendment fails to do is to acknowledge that there are underlying data issues with the Department of Driver Services database and with the Social Security Administration database, and the county registrar cannot fix that issue at all. It also places the responsibility to carry out that review process solely in the hands of each county. There are 159 counties in the state of Georgia, and the bill does not provide for any oversight by the state or by the Secretary of State's office. And so I think inevitably what we would see if this bill were to pass is that the quality of the review conducted by each county would vary, and it may vary by resources or funding or capacity. And that's just unacceptable. And I think we saw that play out for a lot of issues in the last election, that there was vast variation in how elections were administered from county to county. I want to also briefly address sections 30 and section 35 of the bill. These sections attempt to update the code to be consistent with Section 208 of the Voting Rights Act and with a consent order that was entered into last year as a result of litigation that was also filed filed to challenge OCGA 21-2-409. These proposed revisions certainly take care of some of the inconsistencies, but I don't think it goes far enough. The consent order actually provided that Section B2 in its entirety would be inoperable. But if you look at Sections 30 and Section 35 of this House bill, then it proposes to leave intact a language that would restrict the ability of a candidate or candidate's family members to assist any voters unrelated to them. That's not a part of Section 208, and it's also a part of Section B2 that, again, the consent order said would not be enforced by the Secretary of State. So I think that Section B2 should be struck in its entirety in order for this code provision to be consistent both with federal law and with the consent order. Thank you for your time.
We do have a question. Ms. Trammell. Your light was blinking.
Okay. Do you have a proposed solution to this issue with respect to exact match?
I think that there would need to be a number of affirmative provisions, including some states, what they do is they don't freeze the voter registration applications at all. What they will do is they will go ahead and register the voter, and then when the voter goes to the polls, then they will simply show their ID, which they have to anyway, and then they will just vote like everybody else does. So there's actually no federal mandate that people be frozen in this way or kicked off of the rolls altogether.
That would be Mr. Williams.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your information. Are you saying and advocating that someone could register to vote and vote the same day?
I'm not necessarily advocating that, although I do think that that is a good principle. What I'm advocating is under the current exact match protocol that Georgia employs, then if there is a no match or a mismatch under the system, then basically those voter registration applications get frozen. They're put in pending status, and they're not taken out of that until there's further action on the part of the voter or the applicant. And there's actually a time limit on when they can correct that issue, which I think is one of the most problematic parts of the bill altogether, because it risks kicking people off altogether, canceling that voter registration application altogether. But what other
yeah.
states?
Excuse me right there. When someone goes into pending status, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, when someone goes into pending status, they can show up on election day and confirm their identity and are allowed to vote. So they're not disenfranchised.
I have two responses to that, and one is they would, under the current law, they would have to make that correction within a certain time period. I think that the law right now allows for 26 months to correct that error. So if somebody misses a couple of elections, then they actually do have to start from ground zero again.
Yeah, but 26 months gives them time for an election cycle. So if someone registers to vote, and by working and seeing this in action, people register, especially college students. I'm from a college town, and people from Gwinnett, Fulton, DeKalb would come to college in my town. They would register to vote, and when the next election came up, they had already gone back home. They dropped out of school. They had graduated. But there again, I'm not sure about that time limit of 26 months. There again, Ms. Bailey may can answer that, or someone from Secretary of State's office. But still, if they're in a pending status and they have registered to vote, all they've got to do is walk in election day with their identification and confirm who they are. They're taken out of a pending status and put into an active voting status.
That would be if they didn't get kicked off of the rolls because they didn't vote within the 26-month period. And then the other thing
But in that 26-month period after they've registered, they should have gotten a confirmation notice. Here again, we've got to work with the voter to tell them you registered to vote. Make sure you get that confirmation notice. Go online, go onto the Secretary of State's website, see if your name and address is there. And so, there's got to be some responsibility on the voter. There's got to be some responsibility, whether you're a driver's license, to get insurance on your automobile. And you have people, and what I'm saying is, you're right, we've got to get them on there, and I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know if extending it past 26 months, but we've got to, there's so many people moving in and out of an area that people are keeping the voter rolls current. And so there's got to be a cutoff period, and it may be that we compromise on that. That's a good point you brought up, and I thank you for being here, and I thank you for working on this.
Thank you. I do want to respond to that. I think the bottom line in one of the main issues is that regardless, this bill and this law and how it operates right now puts the onus on voters, and it actually catches the voters who get caught up in it are people who submit completely accurate and facially complete voter registration applications, but still get caught up in a mismatch because of a system that is inherently flawed and that has been shown to be flawed. And there are reports that say that it's flawed and that it produces a high level of false mismatches. So you're putting the onus on people who have done nothing wrong and then potentially disenfranchising them. And then the other thing I do want to point out too, because we do election protection and we work with our communities and we see the way that this played out at the polls in the midterm elections, and it was a mess. It was a mess. There were, we were told by the Secretary of State that all people had to do was show up with an acceptable photo ID, but a lot of people did that and they still had to vote provisionally. So there's confusion on the grounds and there's inconsistencies in how poll workers were treating people who were in pending status. And I think the other thing well, I lost my train of thought, but there were a lot of issues that we saw on the ground, and actually I do remember what I was going to say. So the other amendment that I actually take issue with in Section 6 is the amendment that says that you have to show sufficient evidence to the Board of Registrars, the absentee ballot clerk, or a poll manager. That's lines 136 to 137. And that is actually more restrictive than what Secretary Kemp said that you had to do before, because before, during the midterm elections, Secretary Kemp said all you had to do was show up with a photo ID and show it to any poll worker, whereas this actually mandates that you show it to one of the 3 people listed there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's see, Adam Shirley. I believe he is gone. Madeline Soloway.
Thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I come to you today as a taxpayer, a high school teacher, and someone who has followed these issues regarding the voting machines for the past few years. It is critical for the future of our democracy, the future of our children, and the future of the health of our state that all citizens feel like our elected officials were fairly elected and trustworthy. We come off a contentious November 2018 election that was highly controversial and quite frankly mismanaged at best. Many citizens in Georgia rightly feel disenfranchised and have great mistrust in our election process. As we are here before today, legislators are rushing through an election bill that will cost taxpayer dollars upward of $500 million, which includes not only the $150 million in equipment, but we haven't really talked about the contracts, the upkeep, the programming, the maintenance, the training, and the paper. That's a lot of money. Rushing through this process with such enormous expense to the taxpayers is an insult to our democratic process and adds to deep distrust. Hand-marked paper ballots using ocular scanners are used in 70% of elections throughout our country. Let's look at this honestly. Throughout the state of Georgia, our 1st through 12th grade students take standardized tests annually, filling in bubbles. Those tests are graded on ocular scanners. Rarely do we hear of stray marks, erroneously graded tests, and the cost of paper, really. And SAT scores and University of Georgia included are part of this. Meanwhile, the SAFE Commission has been looking at purchasing highly controversial BMD machines, which have been deemed by many experts as highly flawed. They are vulnerable to hacking, unable to provide meaningful audits, and fall short of any minimum standards. We are talking about standards in elections. These machines have been given a failing grade by many experts, yet the SAFE Commission has only one cybersecurity expert on the panel. Would any of you get only one opinion if you needed surgery? Or would any of you elect surgery with an outcome that's unknown? Of course not. Many of you like to consider yourself fiscal conservatives, yet you are looking at spending our hard-earned taxpayer dollars recklessly. Hand-marked paper ballots using ocular scanners are cost-effective, create accountability, are verifiable, we get verifiable election results, reliable, less complex, can provide meaningful audits, and we have the equipment here in the state of Georgia now. We heard from several counties yesterday about the burden of paper for elections. Maybe you need to find a way for the state to pay for the paper rather than the expensive, flawed equipment. In 2002, Georgia purchased statewide the highly controversial and highly flawed DRE system. Once again, the whole state of Georgia is looking to be the first guinea pig for a statewide purchase of the BMD machines. We don't need to make that same mistake again. Finally, Georgia likes to think of itself as a forward-thinking pro-business state. Why would any business care to relocate to the state of Georgia when many citizens feel disenfranchised and mistrust our elected officials? Many of us have been wondering why our elected officials would be pushing this flawed and expensive voting machine policy through. The recent reports in the AJC about the close connections between ES&S and the voting machine vendor selected, the lobbyists, elected officials, Mr. Kemp, leave us wondering about the ethics of the decision. Rather than rushing or flushing $500 million on costly, flawed election systems down the drain, imagine what we could do with healthcare, education, and transportation for the state of Georgia to make it truly worthy of a pro-business, attractive state. Thank you for your time.
All right. Isabel Ildigo? Here's one that we just had. All right. Do we have Isabel Hildigo? All right. Nina Watts? And for the life of me, I can't read this writing. It looks like my own. What is that?
I don't know.
Mr. Trammell.
Mr. Chairman, there were questions about the letter that we spent on January 7, 2019, and I understand there's a signatory to the letter that is here, and I would ask the chair's indulgence to call him so that he might answer some of the committee members' questions that I did not, frankly, have the background to answer. Dr. DeMillo.
Well, I tell you what, Mr. Trammell, I thank you, but I'm going to stick to this right here, and he can sign up toward the end of this if he wishes. Because we've had citizens that's been here for 2 days, and the way it's going, it may be here 3 or 4 days. I'm sorry, I cannot read this name. It's
probably mine because I was after Isabel.
what would be,
CHRISOULA.
I believe that could be. How do you pronounce, what is your name?
Christula.
Christula, all right, and what is your last name?
Vicos.
Cool, no wonder I couldn't read it. All right.
Not very common.
Welcome.
I want to start off by thanking you guys for having us here. It means a lot to the citizens of Georgia. Mr. Fleming, you have such a lovely voice. If you would do me the honors of reading a part of the bill, because even with my glasses on, I'm getting old, and my phone is very small. It's page 19, paragraph B. It starts with line 591 to 599.
Let me be sure I understand. You're asking a committee member. Do you have a copy of the bill?
I have it on my phone, but it's like tiny, tiny. And even these glasses aren't gonna see it. Or anybody else on the committee would be good.
Would you please give her that copy and she can read that?
Great. So it's page 18, 591, paragraph B. The superintendent may appoint, with the approval of the county or municipal governing authority as appropriate, a custodian of the electronic ballot markers, and deputy custodians as may be necessary, whose duty shall be to prepare the devices to be used in the county or municipality at the primaries and elections to be held therein, Each custodian and deputy custodian shall receive from the county or municipality such compensation as shall be fixed by the governing authority of such county or municipality. Such custodian shall, under the direction of the superintendent, have charge of and represent the superintendent during the preparation of the devices as required by this chapter. The custodian and deputy custodian shall serve at the pleasure of the superintendent, and each shall take an oath of office prepared by the Secretary of State before each primary or election, which shall be filed with the superintendent. So, to me, that sounds like it's essentially authorizing counties to designate vendors as custodians to run their entire elections. My problem, besides the obvious, is what happens to the artifacts that come out of that election if now the vendor's in charge of the election process. I did a little digging, Googling, just to make sure that I wasn't wrong. Turns out that our current vendor, ES&S, is unique in claiming that election artifacts are its intellectual property and not a public good. No other vendor, and I checked them all out, to my knowledge, takes this stance. If it is produced in the course of the election, it should be available for public view. All of the artifacts, like the ballot layouts, the results, etc., and should belong to the county. In fact, ES&S has lawsuits against counties all over the country who have either dropped them due to serious malfeasance and or hardware software failures, claiming that they breached their contracts with their company because they own the intellectual property in that area. Quite convenient. Now, to be fair, we have a couple ES&S reps right here today who I see in the back of the room. Maybe they can answer as to why they believe their company can own the intellectual property of any county or district in America. That would be awesome. Because it sounds to me like corporations are trying to own our government. Thank you.
Any questions?
Any questions?
Thank you, ma'am. Lyndon Waller.
Thank you, Chair, and the committee. I was wondering if it would be possible to cede my time over to our Executive Director, Ms. Helen Butler. She's also signed up on the list.
Well, I don't know how much time you get. Yes,
Okay,
let's
thank
let
you.
her come on up. And you're Helen Butler.
Yes, sir, I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to take this time. I was not able to be here yesterday. That's why Lyndon signed up yesterday. Of course, I'm Helen Butler, Executive Director of the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization convened by Dr. Joseph Flowery. And of course, what we do is try to protect that right to vote, since he and other civil rights leaders were able to get the Voting Rights Act in effect, and we want to ensure that all voters participate in the electoral process. I would like to say first that some of the provisions of this bill are steps in the right direction. However, we believe some changes are necessary before you consider passing this bill. I will not try to be redundant in some of those parts of the bills that other people have spoken to, but I want to highlight that we would agree with some of those things that were said. Number one, in terms of Section 1 of the ballot marking devices and ballot tabulating machines, we are part of a state table and submitted our standards for what we've felt should be proposed as a part of any voting system. And I have a copy of my comments today, as well as a copy of those principles, but I will highlight the 5 basic steps that we feel, principles that we feel should be included. A voter verifiable paper trail should be there to ensure voter confidence. A risk limiting audit should be a part of that process, as well as not only a risk limiting process, but we think a procedural audit should be included as well. A system for maintaining a chain of custody for ballots should be there to ensure the election is recountable, preserving the chain of custody of ballots and to maintain a record of that chain of custody. Oversight of elections and audits that include citizen participation. Transparency is really what we feel should be a part of a free and open democracy. And we feel that a uniform system should be in place for all jurisdictions in the state, including all types of voters. Again, we would say that the audit process is crucial to this, not only risk limiting for the machines themselves, but also a procedural audit that should be done pre-certification of the election. Section 6 regarding exact match, we would like to ditto to what Mr. Soto and Ms. Nguyen said with regards to exact match. We were part of the litigation as well with regards to this and feel that what they have already enumerated as what we also are incorporating in our part, that this process should be considered and redone to make sure that voters are not adversely impacted. I can say that my nephew, Devin, a first-time voter, actually was a victim of this exact match. He did everything accurately on his voter registration, but of course, when someone inputted his information, they spelled his name incorrectly, so he was burdened with bringing in his identity to prove who he was when it wasn't his fault. I know that you've said in this new bill that the registrars would take all steps to make sure that didn't happen. But if you use the exact match with the Social Security Administration and driver services, which the Inspector General for the Social Security Administration said it was flawed, then I think we really have to be cognizant and not use that process and use some other method. And since January of 2011, Georgia has had 494,544 voter registration files that have been a part of this match process, and 39% of those are, in other words, 191,855 of those were a no match. And that's putting a burden on voters that more than likely were eligible, but because of some mistake in how the databases are set up, they had to come back and prove that they were eligible. And I think that is not something that should happen. We also believe that continuing the mandatory 26 months for the cancellation of an application violates Section 8 of the National Voter Registration Act, and that you should not use that as a process. In terms of Section 7, cross-check voter registration, if you're talking about the Chris Kobach, Kansas cross-check program, we feel that should not be used because of similar reasons. Its limitations on database matching and the protocols result in erroneous results. Also, there's a part of this bill that says information received from this type of program would be exempt from discovery under the Georgia Open Records Act, and we think that that is in conflict with the National Voter Registration Act, which mandates public disclosure of reasons for determination of voter eligibility. In terms of Section 9, for persons with a felony conviction, again, we're going to advocate that hearing be conducted before the voter is removed in all cases, because there have been situations. I know I've attended a Fulton County Voter Board of Elections meeting where a particular voter was matched, erroneously matched, and was taken off, but had to come back and do provide proof. So we want that matching process, that hearing be conducted before they're removed. In all cases, he was removed and then had to come and ask for a hearing. We think the hearing should be the first part before they're removed. In terms of list maintenance and purges and notice of inactive voters from section 11 and 12, we strongly oppose removing eligible voters from any registration list simply because they exercise their right not to participate in an election. And even though you have a 30 to 60 day last chance notice, and it is an improvement, we still strongly oppose the removal of any voter for inactivity because if they remain eligible. In terms of section 13 through 14, precinct changes and consolidations, I know that we have been parts of lots of precinct consolidation lawsuits and activities to make sure that they didn't change. We feel that there are not enough restrictions, meaningful restrictions put on precinct consolidations and polling location changes, because those kinds of things disproportionately affect people of color. So we would want meaningful restrictions before precinct consolidations and polling location changes could be implemented. In terms of section 37, surrendering your voter ID, if a voter moves out of county, I don't know if you've considered that what happens if I surrender my voter ID and I don't have time between the move to actually get another one. I think you're putting a disproportionate burden on the voter, and we should reconsider that. And in terms of provisional ballots for sections 38 through 39, even though there are improvements over the current law, it still leaves too much discretion to the county registrars, especially when we talk about good faith effort for 159 counties. We would like to see that is strengthened. And also in section 40 to 50 with regards to pre-certification audits, we do favor those, but again, we want to include that they also require a procedural audit as well. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Thank you so much. Eileen Nahammer.
Hello, and thank you for having us here. I'm a resident of Fulton County, and I'm deeply disturbed by many of the things that I heard at yesterday's hearing. And like another citizen we heard from yesterday, I ask that you slow down this process to do your due diligence, because from what I have heard, I do not think that the SAFE Commission and its recommendations reflects the proper due diligence. Before yesterday, my main concern was that it was known during the 2016 elections onwards that Georgia had the most hackable and insecure system in the nation. And that, despite of that, the SAFE Commission was recommending spending $150 million on machines that were still insecure, hackable, and not auditable in any meaningful way. Rather than listening to election cybersecurity experts and going with the gold standard of election security, the hand-marked paper ballots. And before I go into that part, I have one question after listening to something that was said today. I know that there's a lot of discomfort with the thought of hand-marked paper ballots, and what do you do with a disabled voter? Would you not be differentiating them somehow by having them use a ballot marking device? My question is, what do blind voters do currently? Do they not have a different system that they have to use? No, they use the DREs? Just like everybody else. Okay, that was my question. I wasn't sure if everybody used the exact same thing. I know that my mother, who does not walk very well, if she had to use a different machine to vote, she would be very, very happy to vote whatever way was possible for her. And differentiation would not be a matter to her because she wants to exercise her right to vote. But anyway, after yesterday, the many questions I have concern why it seems that only some people or even some vendors seem to have been considered experts by the SAFE Commission and others have been wholly ignored. Not mentioned was that letter, the January 7th letter to the SAFE Commission signed by the 24 leading cybersecurity experts, urging them not to use the BMDs. And 2 days ago, this whole committee and others, I think in Georgia, in the Georgia House, should have received a letter from Dr. Philip Stark at UC Berkeley, which I think one of the members yesterday brought up at the very end. He says, and he is the inventor of risk-limiting audits. He says, ballot marking devices are not secure election technology. He recommends the use of hand-marked paper ballots. And the main point I'd like to stress here is that there seems to be confusion on the difference between using hand-marked paper ballots and using the BMDs. Everybody seems to think everything is the same other than hand marking and the BMDs, and that there could be a problem on the tail end. If you remember that chart that was brought in yesterday, there was somebody who folded it in half and said, well, there could be some kind of hacking at the very tail end when it gets scanned. Well, the problem with the ballot marking devices is there are many points in between from the beginning where hacking or some sort of tampering can occur. You don't know if you press a screen if the machine is actually recording that. And you don't know when it comes out, unless you are very, very good at remembering exactly what you pressed. It's very hard for people to be able to verify, especially for very long, what would you call it, long ballots when there are many, many things to vote for and many, many people to vote for. If it says vote 1, a name, vote 2, a name, it's hard to remember who you voted for unless it is an exact copy of what you voted for. I'd like to talk about another study that was ignored. I believe one of the authors is here. 2 Georgia Tech cybersecurity experts, Richard DeMillo and Robert Cadell, specifically looked at voters' memories when using BMDs and shows that voters are generally unable to detect vote manipulation after they cast their vote on an electronic device such as the BMD, and they see a printout of a ballot summary card. These results are broadly consistent with other recent studies that cast doubt on the reliability and accuracy of memory recall and are evidence of voter memory errors that would make a verified ballot summary card impossible to rely on as a source record for a post-election audit. I do have all of these studies that I'm talking about on file that I will be sending to you. I tried to get it sent out to you before I came, but I was rushing. Likewise, there's a computer science and election expert, Andrew Apple of Princeton University, who published a recent article titled, Why Voters Should Mark Ballots by Hand. I will send that to you as well. Some other experts that we heard from yesterday stated things that were baffling to me. When asked if she had trouble with the current DREs, Ms. Bailey, and I apologize, forget what her title is, she replied, no, we have not. But I, as a citizen, have heard of numerous instances where voters picked one candidate and somehow the machine recorded the opposite candidate. That was the DRE, and that is a DRE problem. And why Ms. Bailey said that there were no problems is baffling to me. Secretary of State Raffensperger also said that his position was that hand-marked paper ballots were not secure. Although he has never run an election before, does he know something that all 30 or so of the experts that I just mentioned above and cybersecurity experts who have been referenced till now, all of these experts know, but he does not? Or the other way around, that he knows that hand-marked paper ballots are not secure, but somehow the cybersecurity and election experts are saying that they are the most secure. Also, Rick Barron, the director of Fulton County Elections, said that going to hand-marked paper ballots would make early voting more difficult because of the up to 1.2 million ballots that would be needed to be provided at the 27 early voting sites in Fulton County. However, Does he not realize that the same number of ballots would need to be provided even if we use the BDMs? Because you have to put those papers into the machines, whether you're going to touch a screen or you're going to hand mark it. So it's the same number of paper pieces. I would also like to point out that Mr. Barron, even though he is an expert in some ways, he is currently under review by the Fulton County Board of Elections. And at the last meeting, which was last week, there were many, many citizens who were calling for his resignation. We are not happy with him in Fulton County. And those of us who were present, we could not believe our ears when Mr. Barron at that meeting last week told the Board of Elections that he was for the ballot marking devices, and how did all of the members of the board feel about ballot marking devices? Their answer was, we have no information and we cannot make a decision because you have not provided us with anything from the Safe Commission and you have not told us anything about what's going on. How can that be? What kind of system is running here? I mean, it's just baffling to me. We also heard from Georgia voting officials saying that they feared longer wait times if people used hand-marked paper ballots. However, Jennifer Cohn, who is an expert on voting machines and has done extensive research, pointed out in an article that she wrote that touch screens limit the number of people who can vote at one time to the number of machines that are present, right? I mean, that makes sense. The only thing that limits the number of people who can vote at one time with hand-marked paper ballots is how many pieces of paper you have and how many pens you have. And the bottleneck could be at where the optical scanners are, but that would be the same either way. So it would actually be faster to use hand-marked paper ballots. Suffice it to say, I feel that much more investigation and inquiry must go into the very important topic of voting machines for Georgia, and that it is necessary to talk to more experts and contact those states that are using the hand-marked paper ballots. I also have a second request, which is that the subcommittee investigates the relationship between ES&S and David Dove and other current or former Georgia officials. We know that Georgia is under the scrutiny of the nation's eye. Our elections since the midterms have been in many newspapers, in much of the media. I have friends calling me saying, what is going on in Georgia? I think everything here has to be done beyond the right way. And just having all of these convoluted relationships between our old Georgia, I think it was the person in charge of elections is now a vice president at ES&S. Governor Kemp's former Secretary of Staff, while he was the SOS, is his current executive counsel, and he has had many trips paid for by ES&S. I mean, these are all things that really need to be investigated, and it does not smell right to all of us. So I would like to close by saying that President Jimmy Carter recently wrote in an opinion piece in the New York Times that transparency in elections and political processes is needed to build trust and popular confidence. Voters must be able to freely examine key information about governance and about electoral processes and results. And as you have heard from yesterday, we, the voters, have lost confidence in both the elections and the political processes in Georgia. So please take time to do your due diligence. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. All right. You know, is anybody here that's guy signed up that can't say what they need to say in less than 5 minutes? All right. If the future speakers I've got, I'm gonna see if I can put y'all on a limit. That's something I don't like to do, but from what we're experiencing right now, we're gonna be here for 3 or 4 days. And that's not, I don't know that that's we're hearing all the stuff, I think we're hearing a lot of redundancy about concerns. Shay Roberts?
Good afternoon. I don't want to be redundant today, so with the chairman's permission, I would like to defer my time as requested by Mr. Trammell to, is it Mr. DeMillo, Dr. DeMillo? Sorry. To let the expert who was party to this letter, because I think we're all interested in hearing what he has to say, so I would defer my time to him if that's okay. He can just have my time. Is that okay? I'll let him take my time. Thank you.
Well, I'm here to answer any questions you might have about the letter. The chairman characterized the letter, I think, incorrectly. And so if you have questions, Mr. Fleming, about the letter, I'm here to answer them.
No questions? Mr. Trammell?
So, Dr. DeMillo, could you just tell us where you're from and what your background is?
Yes, sir. So I'm currently the Warren Professor of Computer Science at Georgia Tech. I'm former Dean of the College of Computing at Georgia Tech. I'm the former Chief Technology Officer at Hewlett-Packard. I ran the Software Test and Evaluation Project for the Department of Defense. I've been a Vice President in charge of product development, mainly in the area of cybersecurity, for the Bell Labs spinoff called Bellcore. I've spent my life in cybersecurity, mainly for national security applications.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, have you analyzed the issue of ballot marking devices versus hand-marked paper ballots with respect to security in the voting process?
I have. My conclusion is consistent with what's in the letter. From the point of view of functionality, hand-marked paper ballots are substantially no different. Ballot marking devices are substantially no different than the current DRE systems that we use. The DRE systems that are in use in Georgia have been repeatedly hacked over the last 20 years. In fact, I do not know of a single instance where someone has tried to hack the Georgia voting machines and failed at it. And the consensus view of cybersecurity experts is that there is nothing inherently in ballot marking devices that provides any additional levels of security. And there's certainly nothing in 316 that requires additional levels of security.
And Mr. Chairman, just final question. What would be your recommendation to this committee?
My recommendation to the committee is exactly what Professor Lee suggested. Hand-marked paper ballots, secure vaults to keep those ballots in, optical scanners, and risk-limiting audit.
That's it, Mr. Chairman.
I do have one comment about a
Yes, sir.
about a conversation that took place in Twitter sphere last night with Mr. Turner. So the question, Mr. Turner, is what is the difference between, from an audit point of view, a hand-marked paper ballot and a machine-produced paper ballot? As we saw in Philip Stark's letter, you cannot conduct a risk-limiting audit if you don't have a verified source document, and the machine-produced ballot is not a verified source document.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir. My question, you said over the past 20 years, you've seen the DRE machines hacked.
Yes.
How did that take place?
In any way that you want to imagine. So regardless of let me amplify on that answer. Regardless of what you think the threat is. So if you think the threat is someone who has physical access to the machines, machines can be hacked that way. If you think that the threat is someone who has access to the supply chain where the machines are manufactured, they can be hacked that way. If you think that the machines can be hacked because they have to be updated from other machines that are then connected to the internet, they can be hacked that way. We had a demonstration at Georgia Tech last spring that Representative Turner was present at, where Professor Alex Halderman from the University of Michigan simply inserted the memory card that's used to program the machines on election day, and the machines were hacked that way. If you think that the system is secure because the devices are physically under logistics control and human observation, we have photographs of strangers in polling places where the machines are otherwise unattended and can be accessed by anyone. If you think that the tamper-resistant devices that are used to indicate whether the machines have been improperly accessed are a secure mechanism, I can show you 3-minute videos on YouTube that tell you how to defeat those devices. If you think that the operating system that's running on the DREs is secure, I can show you reams and reams of vendor-supplied vulnerabilities of how to access those systems. So literally, every layer of security that the Secretary of State says protects our system has been penetrated by an actual attack by an actual human being.
You know, I appreciate it. I'm certainly no IT expert, but for 16 years, I saw those machines work. I was here when Secretary Kathy Cox purchased them. I know the process of the securing the machines with the tabs with the numbers. I don't believe it. I would love to. I'd love to see you.
Excuse me one second.
Yes, sir.
Do we have anybody that's in physical distress that needs a doctor out there? I'm going to ask y'all again to please respect the committee process.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and I respect your opinion, but without.
Excuse me, I'm not giving you an opinion. I can't, as an employee of a public university, I can't give you an opinion.
Well, that's what you're doing.
No, I'm not. I'm giving you data. I'm giving you facts. So the fact of the matter is that those tamper-resistant ties can be hacked by anyone with 3 minutes training. There is a conference in Las Vegas called DEF CON.
You're going past my question.
That has a room called
Mr. Chairman.
Tamper-resistant hacking that shows you how to do it.
All right. Mr. Williams, you pass.
Yes, I'll pass.
All right. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to be, thank you, Mr. DeMillo. I want to be very clear about when you say hacking, you're talking about in events like what you and I saw, that was a hacking, that was one instance of that.
So when a cybersecurity, yes, that's one.
Okay, so it's also when you talk about hacking our machines, you're talking about when, like at DEF CON, when they were allowed to have unfettered access to these machines so they could figure out a way to do it.
Yes.
When you say hacking over the last 20 years, do you actually mean in the election environment at a polling place that you have evidence that there has been a hacking in that environment?
Yes.
Could you please provide that to this committee?
Well, so there's been over the last 2 years extensive coverage of Logan Lamb's hack of the Center for Election Systems.
I'm talking about the DRE machines that we have now. You just told me that you have evidence that there's been hacking in a polling place. I would like to have that evidence submitted to this committee. Could you do that for me?
That was a hack of a machine in the polling place.
What was?
The hack of the Center for Election Systems.
No, that was the database, voting database. It wasn't actual machines that got hacked.
And that data ends up on the machines in polling places.
So your contention is that Logan Lamb's efforts was a hack to flip votes in a polling place?
No.
Okay.
No.
Because I want to be very clear to the committee, because I understand what you're saying, but these members of this committee may not. They don't have a technology background, all of them. Some of them are elections experts, some of them are attorneys. I'm a tech guy, so I understand what you're saying when you say they've been hacked. They've been hacked in lab environments. They've been hacked in test environments, sandboxes. But in our actual elections, you have no evidence that there's anything that's ever flipped a vote in the last 20 years.
No, you would have no way of knowing that.
That's okay. That's fair. That's a fair statement.
But
I want to go.
But also to be
Sure.
fair, you would have to look.
Well, we had an elections expert who's been here for 30 years, and she said she looked every time for the programs, the 3 programs that were on the DRE machines. She checked. She was part of that process to look every single time. That was her testimony. She was the first person to speak today. I don't know if she's still here or not, but that was her testimony, is that she did look.
So that testimony cannot be truthful because you would have to do a forensic analysis of the machines. You would have to determine whether or not, for example, a rootkit had been installed on the Windows CE operating system. And I don't think that there's anyone who represents that kind of analysis has ever been done.
So this is where we're coming to, and I'm going to get to some of the other questions I have if the chairman will allow me. We're getting to a point now where we have 2 sets of experts who are saying different things. And so this committee is going to have to make some decisions to limit our risk going forward based upon what you say and what others say. And so we have to take all of this information in together. Now, you said earlier you can't give opinions, but I'm reading from the letter.
Can I just add one?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
To what you said.
Absolutely.
The things that I'm telling you are not opinions. The things that I'm telling you are things that are in textbooks that we teach to graduate students.
Well, this is a fascinating segue because you set me up perfectly because I'm holding Dr. Stark's letter, and he says very, very clearly, I write as an individual, not as a representative of my employer, the U.S. EAC, or any other entity. The opinions expressed below are my own. Would you agree that he's expressing opinion here?
I haven't seen Dr. Stark's letter, the one you're holding.
For the conspiracy theorists in the crowd, I was left off of the CC list on this, so I object that I was left off of this. I had to get this from actually an activist emailed it to me last night, and it's the first time I had an opportunity to read it. So as I go through it, he uses phrases like available evidence suggests that voters are not able to check BMDs effectively or reliably. Would you agree with that?
Yes, that's my study.
What is you said that's your study?
Yes.
What can you? I wasn't here when you first sat down. I had to run out. So would you, for my edification, would you tell me about? Was it a scholarly study?
Yes.
And it's published?
Yes.
Can you provide that to me, please?
Yes. Yes.
I would appreciate that. The other things in this letter, he says it's not a good reason to adopt BMDs for everybody to vote on an accessible device. Would you agree that that's an opinion?
Say that again, please.
So he says here that if everyone voted on an accessible device, it would guarantee that an accessible device has been set up for voters who benefit from using one. But that's not a good reason to adopt BMDs. Would you agree that that's an opinion?
Well, no. So when we have to comply in a university with the ADA, we have to make accommodations for students with disabilities. That doesn't mean that we impose that accommodation on everyone.
Yeah, but
we're required to level the playing field. We're not required to lower the level of security for everyone that votes, and that seems to be the argument.
Yeah, but that's a classroom environment. We're talking about things like voter anonymity and creating different sets of ballots for different people. One of the things that I tried to do in HB 680 last year when we first introduced the first hand-marked paper ballot bill was deal with this issue of there are small precincts, and you might have one person come in who has to use a HAVA-enabled device, like a ballot marking device. Right. And that person's ballot could be different than the hand-marked paper ballots that are pre-printed or printed on demand.
We saw demonstrations at the railway station from vendors whose ballot marking produced paper ballots were indistinguishable.
Yeah, there was one vendor that does that.
2, I think.
Yeah, so we would be down to picking 2 vendors based upon just voter anonymity alone if we wanted to protect that. So we're already down to limiting ourselves for vendors, and we haven't even taken into account other things like cost at that point. Is that right?
Well, I mean, the cost is going to be lower because you're not acquiring 27,000 ballot marking devices.
So, okay. I would, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to read your study. I want to be informed. So if you would send that to me or let me know how I can obtain it, I would appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Mr. Blackman.
Try to be real brief. Thank you for your testimony, Dr. DeMille. If you've got a print process in place, just as out of curiosity, and I'm no expert as you are, but if you have that on a print on demand and you have that pre-printed ballot, you're going to be printing something regardless of whether it's the BMD that's printing it or the printer on demand or the pre-printed device, as I understand it.
The ballot, yes.
Yes, sir.
That's true, yes.
So would many of those hacking opportunities also present themselves, being that something has to tell that printer how to print or what to print? I mean, I'm just saying some of the same hacking abilities are in that process as well. Is that right?
The vulnerability has to do with voter choice, and so what we're concerned with is that some unobservable piece of technology will get between the formation of an intention in the voter's mind and the indelible transfer of that intention to a piece of paper. That's where the hack occurs. And so a hand-marked paper ballot imposes no intermediate technology. What you see is literally the best evidence of voter intent. It's what the voter did. It's what the voter signaled when he or she marked that paper ballot. The ballot marking device inserts a piece of technology in between those two processes, and now you're left with the problem of trying to figure out what is the nature of the source document that really represents voter intent. And if it's something that's mediated by this device that could have been compromised, that marked ballot is useless as a record of voter intent.
I'm just saying, is there no circumstance under which a pre-printed ballot or a print-on-demand ballot, that system could be hacked, whether you're coding into something that the scanner is reading that could adjust the outcome there?
I'm not quite sure what that would be. I mean, we normally think in terms of vulnerabilities, and the very definition of a vulnerability is a weakness in the system for which there's a published exploit. And what you're describing may or may not be a weakness. I know of no published exploits along those
Maybe
lines.
I can capture.
It's an interesting idea, but I don't know that it's been looked at.
Maybe I can catch you afterwards,
Okay.
and we can discuss that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Turner.
Sorry, just another follow-up question. Are you aware of which states are using risk limiting audits today?
Some of them, yeah.
Which ones do you know
Well,
of?
the most famous one is Colorado.
Colorado
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
and then there's Rhode Island and Virginia.
Yeah.
So, what do you know what machines they use
For
casting ballots or
well,
tabulating?
so they're not centrally controlled. So Colorado has a mixture of machines because the I guess it's the counties that decide in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Maryland, I think they have a mixture of machines too.
So in Colorado, I'm told they use VVPAT. Are you familiar with what VVPAT is?
Yes.
So VVPAT, for the members of the committee who don't know, it's where the ballot is not touched by the voter. It remains behind glass,
Right.
But there is a paper receipt. And there are studies that show that particular type of machine is not very confidence building because people don't actually look at the receipt when they're not allowed to touch it. Would you agree to that?
That's my study. Yes.
That's your study?
Yes.
I thought that was the Rice University.
Well,
Was
we
it-
repeated their experiment and found the same thing. Yes.
Okay, so so the gold standard for people who have implemented risk limiting audits, Colorado, they're the first they broke the frontier. They're using VVPAT machines. Is that correct?
Well, they're using Clear Ballot. They're using lots of. Clear Ballot would be an example of a machine that actually
marking device.
is a hand-marked paper ballot.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they do that as well, but they're also allowing, and so Virginia uses a mix of machines as well. They're not using a uniform system.
Not
like we're
DREs,
proposing.
but yeah, mix
Yeah, so they decertified their DREs
Right,
after
right.
the event in Las Vegas
Right.
a year or two ago. Also using ballot marking devices, is that correct?
Well, a mixture of hand marked paper ballots and ballot marking devices.
Right.
Yeah.
So they are, so we have 2 states that are implementing that we know of, and then Rhode Island, I'm not sure, I'll be honest with you, I'll admit that I don't know.
Rhode Island was a pilot, I believe.
So, but they're moving towards,
Yeah.
similar to what we want to do. We want to do a pilot before we implement full-blown, make sure this is something we can do effectively. So, so we have 3 states. Do you know if Rhode Island is using ballot marking devices, or are they relying wholly on?
I do not know that, no.
Neither do I. So if somebody could do the research, I'm sure somebody here could Google that quickly. But basically, 2 out of the 3 states that are doing risk limiting audits that were created by Dr. Stark are using ballot marking devices. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
I have to say,
right.
we're in contact with the people in those states that are doing it. They're aware of our study, and I think it will influence what they do.
All right, Doc, we appreciate it. I think we about wore us out.
Thank you.
All right, Cynthia. Cynthia Pursley. And I'm going to make an attempt to go back to the 5-minute rule.
That should not be a problem,
Even better, brevity is at a premium.
Yes,
Thank you.
of course. My name is Cindy Pursley. I'm a citizen from Noonan, Georgia. This is the first time I've ever spoken in front of a committee, so. A little about my background. I'm a retired CPA, spent half my career in public practice. Oh, I'm sorry. Like I said, I'm new at this. I spent half of my career in public practice and the other half in corporate, as a corporate tax manager. So I've been the auditor and the audited. That's just a little bit about my background, but the reason I'm here is to pick up where my father left off. I have to give a bit of time to my dad, who was a POW in Japan for 28 months, and left that camp after that time at 89 pounds, and took an oath to protect and defend our Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. And way things have gone in our country, I'm trying to pick up that baton and run with it, because our Constitution is very important. The few things I just wanted to reiterate here that some folks have said is transparency and simplicity in the audit process are very, very important. My auditors would be all over me if they didn't understand what in the heck it was I was doing, and that's pretty much what Georgia's been doing the last several years. You get trust in the system if voters have a piece of paper in their hand. We're simple people, most of us. We just like to see what we voted for. Barcodes mean nothing to voters. Technology is grand, but it isn't always the be-all to end-all. I hate to see what would happen if the grid blew up. And barcodes are not easily auditable. My second point is I was a poll watcher in the last election. And the thing that one of the things I noticed the most, besides the amazing poll workers that are just mind-boggling in their dedication, is the registration process was hugely a problem. So many people were turned away. I was in a precinct of 993 voters came through. I didn't keep exact count as I was looking through it, but when they went to the Department of Driver Services, the DDS, to do their address change, so many times they didn't come through. So they weren't able to vote in the precinct that they thought they were eligible to vote in. Now, in a county like Coweta, that is not necessarily a huge problem if you can drive 5 miles down the road. But for people that moved into the county, there was one from Savannah. She couldn't drive back to Savannah. I saw it over and over and over again. If I'd realized it was such a problem, I would have kept better count. I did in the afternoon. I counted, oh goodness, 20, 25 of them, just in a couple-hour period. The address change situation, and then there was people that moved into the state from other states that went to the department, the DDS, filled out their paperwork, checked their box, and thought they had registered to vote, and they showed up and they couldn't vote. I found that most disturbing. Every voter should have the right to vote. Yes, sir? And that was really my last point, except to say that the goal for our voting system should be to endanger trust and engage our voters. The last election made us a laughingstock of the country. It really did. And I hope we can agree that under our Constitution, all eligible voters should be able to vote, and we need to make that happen. And part of that problem was the registration system. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam Shirley, understand you've come back and you've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, as with every time I address you individually, I have to start by thanking you for your service. I live in Athens and I teach middle school in commerce. As a voter, I appreciate that this bill is trying to improve our flawed current system. As a teacher, I will feel even better encouraging my students to vote, knowing that we have solved many of the problems from last November's election. Forgive me if I repeat something that was said earlier today. I'm only just now getting here from meeting with my senator. If I might first refer back to the question Representative Williams asked yesterday of one of the commenters. I believe it was an exchange around, wouldn't you be able to simply choose to take a provisional ballot at the ballot box if you objected to the electronic system? Ms. Bailey, the elections expert from Richmond County, was sitting next to me, and I checked with her first before I threw her name out here. She was shaking her head and saying no, that would not be something that we could do. So for what it's worth, that is currently not allowed, just for what it's worth. As a teacher, I've learned the value in presenting a point in different ways, and so with that in mind, I would like to rephrase some of the skepticism that I'm hearing about barcodes. Bear with me, when I buy protein bars at the store, I notice the checkout scanner shows Larabar, regardless of whether I buy an apple pie or a banana bread Larabar. And so if the trust of so many of us in our elections has been shaken, it's not too far of a stretch for some among us to suspect that a ballot barcode might just say 1 vote cast instead of 1 vote cast for candidate X. Just for what it's worth, that might clarify some of the concerns some of us have. In light of this concern, if the committee has heard testimony that barcodes would not be required for audits, then perhaps the measure could be amended so as to stipulate that the only marks allowed on the elector verifiable printed ballot shall be recognizable to the elector as reflecting their vote. It seems that would go a long way towards satisfying the concerns that barcodes might obfuscate the process. My final comment, with the measure, it specifies an elector verifiable paper ballot and that it'll be easy to read. I fear that the printed ballot will leave open the possibility of misleading printed ballots by, for example, failing to show me what I didn't vote for. If I'd skipped voting for lieutenant governor, if it didn't clearly say you left this blank, I might walk out of there thinking I cast a vote when I didn't. I know right now there's the flexibility to ensure that doesn't happen, but if this could be amended, it might be able to stipulate that printed ballots must clearly show votes that were cast as well as votes that were not cast to make it clear, like I said before, if I didn't vote for lieutenant governor. Just for what it's worth, suitable places for an amendment might be lines 48, 338, or 529. While we're under the hood fiddling with things, so to speak, I think it would behoove us to be as clear as possible whenever necessary. Thank you for your time, and thank you again for your service.
You know what? I really do want to thank you because you got in under 5 minutes. Thank you, sir. All right. Robin Joy Shahar. No? I really like her. Sarah Tyndall, Democratic Party of Georgia. I'm sorry I can't read your last name.
It is Gazelle. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Georgia House, for allowing me the opportunity to speak briefly about HB 316. My name is Sarah Tyndall Gazelle, and I am a registered voter from Cobb County. I also serve as the Voter Protection Director for the Democratic Party of Georgia, in which position I oversaw a program that took in more than 65,000 calls from voters who had issues casting their ballots, and thousands more firsthand reports from poll watchers. Many of our speakers today have talked about the content of the bill. I would like to speak very briefly on process. I hope that you will create an opportunity for all the members of this committee and members of the General Assembly to have a thorough understanding of both what is being proposed here and what options are available to Georgians as we face a multi-year investment that ultimately will cost the state and counties hundreds of millions of dollars and forms the very basis of our democratic government. I hope you'll make the time to talk to question experts, to talk with election administrators from other states who have already undergone this transition from DREs to hand-marked paper ballots or other forms, to talk about that transition. Although admittedly you would be hard-pressed to find any state that's transitioned to a universal ballot marking device system. That state doesn't exist, although some counties have chosen to take that route. I hope you'll be able to ask questions of financial analysts who will be able to give firm figures not only of the initial cost of this bill, but also the ongoing expenses that counties will be required to take on. For instance, this bill authorizes counties to hire external custodians that would not only store election machinery, as has been done up until now, but also to, quote, prepare the devices for use in elections, essentially outsourcing election preparation. What is the long-term financial impact and the burden that we're placing on our counties? These numbers have to be understood. I hope you'll speak to experts on auditing to understand what systems and records are necessary to conduct a meaningful audit that serves the purpose of ensuring that votes will be counted as the voter intended. I also hope that you will speak further with cybersecurity experts, and I appreciate the fact that you've been able to speak with one of the foremost ones that Georgia's fortunate to have today, to understand further their concerns and how best that we can protect Georgia and our voting system. Finally, I hope you'll weigh all the information you obtain, evaluate all of our options objectively, without any influence from parties with a fiduciary interest, and make the best decision for the sake of Georgia's voters and the integrity of our elections. Georgians deserve that. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. All right, Susan Whitney.
My name is Susan McQuethy. At this point, I think there's little left to be said to convince anyone that ballot marking devices are not the recommendation of the brightest minds in the country. Einstein, another brilliant mind, is credited with saying the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. We've already suffered through 16 years of paperless, unverifiable, unauditable, unrecountable elections with breaches of the KSU server, 127,000 undercount in the most recent election, flipped votes, frozen screens, illegal patches, lost memory. I could go on. But the proposed system described in H.R. 316 is equally as unverifiable, unauditable, and unrecountable. So do we expect different results? Are we insane? The only difference between DREs and BMDs is paper, which gives voters the illusion of verifiability, but that's all it is, an illusion, sleight of hand. I'm asking you to amend H.R. 316 or create a new bill that deals only with a new voting system. For starters, the word barcode is completely missing from the bill, a very serious omission. Without language to prohibit votes being embedded in code, this paper-based system is nothing more than sleight of hand. Most voters will believe that they are verifying their selections and tabulating them correctly, which is really, and while it's anybody's guess, how that code was generated. And there's a new term in this bill, scanning ballot, which implies that voter selections are encoded on ballot summaries. I think a better name for this type of ballot is scamming ballot because of the way it misleads voters. The term scanning ballot needs to be defined, and if barcodes or QR codes are present, that needs to be part of the definition. No one has ever explained why barcodes need to be there in the first place, especially as they contradict best practice for printed vote records. So there really shouldn't be any need to use the term, except to obscure what is really taking place. Ironically, there are several mentions in line 339 and line 416 of ease of reading by electors based on clear type and good lighting, but not a word about the ease of reading the content of the ballots. Is there something to hide? There must be. I'm asking that you add language to this bill to assure Georgia voters that their selections will not be embedded in and tabulated by barcodes or QR codes. A ballot is not a summary. This is an example of a summary. It's not a ballot. I'm asking that you add language that defines a paper ballot as a full-face ballot, like this, that contains the names of all candidates and text of initiatives that have the candidates for and against, and all the wording of the initiatives for voter verification. A full-face ballot enables voters to authentically ensure that their votes reflect their intentions, which is not possible with a summary. I'm further asking you to add language that demands that optical scanners read the same marks that the voters can read. In other words, only human readable marks, not barcodes, not QR codes. How can audits mean anything when the data that is entered might be incorrect in the first place? Garbage in, garbage out. While I believe that hand-marked paper ballots are the gold standard for voting in a democracy, we seem to be, hell-bent on spending money here, hundreds of thousands of dollars on unnecessary and insecure technology. So please at least provide equivalent provisions for voter verifiability and confidence. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Wanda Mosley. Do we have a Wanda Mosley in attendance? All right. Devin Ward. Devin Ward? Yes, sir.
Devin Barrington Ward. I represent the Black Futurist Group. At the Black Futurist Group, we're dedicated to building black futures because we recognize that when the black community is strong, the rest of our communities is strong. And one of the ways that we can build the futures of the black community is by ensuring that the black community and others that have been marginalized and historically disenfranchised always have the right to vote and always have increased access to voting. This bill does not do that. While this bill does take up some good policy reforms, it doesn't go far enough because it doesn't restore trust. This quick and rush bill was created in a vacuum and lacks the involvement of the communities who were disproportionately impacted by what happened in November. The communities that have been disproportionately impacted for years by this intentional mismanagement of the democratic process here in Georgia. Listen to the voters. They don't want this. We don't trust this strong desire and this rushed desire by many members of this committee to push more flawed voting machines that cost a lot of money. We don't want an environment where you have to use your right to vote or you'll lose it. And we don't want a bill that has been written by a member who has previously supported reducing early voting access hours, supported the use of police officers to challenge the registration and verify the registration of black residents in rural Georgia, and has previously endorsed the now flawed exact match system, which has been flawed by the federal government and in court. As a black man, I have very little confidence in our electoral process here in Georgia. one of the reasons why I don't have trust in this process is because every time I come to the state capitol to talk about voting, it feels like the 1950s and 60s. Were 15 state troopers here yesterday. Think about that. Every time this country we have issues with voting, as a black person, the police are always involved. It feels like intimidation. I don't understand why at 29 I have the same testimony that my grandmother has at 79. If you want to put trust back in this process, work with the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the mismanagement of democracy. If you really want to restore trust in this process, be bold. Do more than what this bill is doing. You could restore trust in this process by also including automatic same-day voter registration. You could automatically restore the voting rights of formerly incarcerated folks. You could teach high school students the importance of their vote and how to engage in the democratic process. And you can stop using the police to intimidate those of us who want to hold you accountable for making sure that we have the right to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Janine Dufont.
Hi, my name is Smythe DeVal. Janine had to leave, so she asked me to present on her behalf. Janine did a fabulous study. The cost related to this proposed, I'd like to pass these out. This is a spreadsheet. And then here is just remarks. So this is, we've talked about millions of dollars and the comparison between the hand-marked paper ballot and the cost of acquisition or capital cost, as well as the cost of maintenance contracts. And one of the things that came out in yesterday's hearing was there had not been a robust financial look at the options under consideration to replace this election system. And in Janine's experience, you can't make a good financial decision without knowing the financial consequences, and you have to know what your capital costs are, your rollout cost, ongoing operating cost, and you need to consider the predicted functional life of the equipment, especially with things like touch screen scanners and printers. You know, I'm directing these comments not only to this committee, but also to all 159 counties and the county commissions and the people who are actually having to pay for these kinds of things. And I hope that they really perk up, because when you start talking about the hardware cost of 27,000 machines compared to the hardware cost of 2,750, which is all you would need for satisfying the ADA, you're talking some major, major money. And when you're talking about the maintenance contracts, you're going to be locked into those maintenance contracts for 27,000 machines compared to 2,750. This spreadsheet has 3 options, and I want to let you know that all 159 counties out there, we are willing to take this model, share the spreadsheet with you, and you can run it for your own county. Cobb County will save $832,000 with a hand-marked paper ballot and post-limiting audits. Walton County, a much smaller county, save $107,000. Baldwin would save $27,000. As a Libertarian, I was the Libertarian candidate for the Georgia Secretary of State. I ran as the fiscal conservative in this race. And I got to tell you, I am just loving the fact that I can appeal to the Tea Partiers, to the disgruntled Republicans, that I can appeal to independents and independent-minded folks and say, hey, what? The Republicans have abandoned the fiscal responsibility, and they are actually ignoring the advice of the best minds in Georgia and in the country. With hand-marked paper ballots, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars in acquisition cost, millions and millions of dollars of contract costs, $450 to $500 million. Here are the numbers. Here's the study that you guys should be doing. Again, this stuff is going to be available, and they can do tabs for each individual county. Heads up, to every single county commissioner out there, you are about to get snookered if you go on with this particular BMD type of thing. Lastly, change subject. There was an exchange between a member of, has there any evidence of a hacking going on in the election? I am a co-plaintiff in the Lieutenant Governor undervote case. All right. For those of you who don't know, we have the hugest undervote in Georgia election history this past election. Okay. What that means, the undervote, is that means that people did not choose to participate in that race. All right. On the hand-marked paper on the absentee ballots, there is no undervote other than normal. With the touchscreen machines only, there's 130-some thousand votes missing. Mr. Turner, you said you wanted evidence. We have been obstructed from getting that evidence by the Secretary of State and by the courts. And I would love to have any Republicans on this committee. In fact, it is really something that we have the largest undervote in Georgia history, and there is no intellectual curiosity from anyone in leadership on this committee as to why that undervote took place only on the DRE machines and not on the paper absentee ballots. You cannot prove it was not hacking. And the thing is if you look into it, if it was a programming error, it would be evenly distributed across all machines across the counties. But that's not the case. Where this undervote occurs is in primarily Democratic areas and primarily and significantly in areas of color. Okay? So there, something went bad wrong. Again, my name is Smythe Duval. I represent the Libertarian Party of Georgia. We welcome fiscal conservatives to come to our party.
Dana Bowers.
Hi, my name is Dana Bowers. I am a lifelong Gwinnett County voter, and I just kind of wanted to make it really short, keep up with everything that's going on, but I would like to ask for respect just as you were asking for respect. I'm really shocked that I've attended every single Safe Commission meeting, all of these committee meetings for HB 316 and SB 403. And I'm so surprised that what we're receiving feels like we are not being heard because we have jokes and we have condescending things that are coming back at us. We've been trying to provide this information for you for a long time. I have personally sent emails to the entire Georgia General Assembly for the past year and a half. I am the face of a disenfranchised voter. My vote did not count in the Georgia general election of 2018. My absentee ballot was rejected. I'm also a co-plaintiff on the Gwinnett County lawsuit that actually got the absentee ballots counted that were needed. I have sworn statements of my 2 experiences in the general election. The only vote of mine that I know that counted, maybe, was in the runoff for Secretary of State. That's it. I ask this committee to please provide the respect that is needed for the information and the data that has been given to you. I completely changed my presentation. I was going to talk about optical scanners, some more great facts and data, but I'm just actually appalled at the reception that we are receiving, especially as another disenfranchised voter, because I stand for hand-marked paper ballots with risk-limiting audits, and I have spent a year and a half of my life doing research to prove that that is the best thing to do. And as a disenfranchised voter, I want this committee to honor the fact that my vote didn't count this past year. I want my vote to count just like everyone else's should. So please provide us the respect that we need and take into consideration the experts' advice, the experts' opinions, plus the experts' facts. They are facts. They are upheld in state and federal court. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. John Fortuin. John Fortune. John Stanton.
Surely Dana has a few more moments. Would you? I'll gladly. She kept us all on our toes. Look, I am since the age of a high chair, a lifelong Atlanta, Georgia resident. I'm currently working on a group named Equitable Elections. And what we're seeing is that, sorry about that, is that these DREs that were provided by Diebold and now the BMDs provided by many people of same names but with a different company name do much the same, and that is tally votes that we're not sure we cast. And I don't want to get into the redundancy, so I'll leave it real simple. I don't like to sugarcoat things that deal in democracy. I truly believe in our democratic republic. Both parents fought in World War II. I cherish that, truly. It's not the voter's job to verify their ballot when they go vote with these summary cards. Let's not say that they're printed ballots like Mark Neese and Greg Bluestein have omitted in several of their columns and articles in the AJC. They write well, they generally include all the facts, but they've somehow omitted some of the key points. My key points seem to have vanished, so I'm trying to get the memory recall. Let me just swing it. Like I said, I do not take lightly any jokes about our democratic republic. I think these BMDs are toying with our democratic republic, and I do not trust them any further than I could pick one up and throw it. And I wouldn't do that because I'm not a violent person. But, and I wouldn't have to want to pay for it. But if you cannot trust the device with which you vote on, how can you trust the members with whom count those votes? How can you trust the system? We can't, we don't, we haven't for a long, long time, that being the voters. Finances, $150 million. Can anyone appear, please? And I want to thank you for your time and your attention. But can anyone please tell us why we're going to spend $150 million on a system to replace one that's antiquated, that we could also receive a more simplified system that costs approximately $120 million less? Anybody? 20-second reason? 12-second reason? 2 seconds? Okay? That's sad, respectfully. That is a very, very sad statement towards our democracy here. Listen, I don't like to sugarcoat it, but I'm going to. Brian Kemp, Governor Kemp, once Secretary of State Kemp, has settled many lawsuits in regards to voting suppression, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This looks to me like the shining star of a suppressive machine. It can do everything that the DREs did plus. Won't have to worry about extension cords and too few devices and some machines that don't function quite properly in certain precincts. Everybody can get nice shiny ones. And I believe that these machines hold what I consider to be corruptible code. The barcodes are a joke, and we all know that nobody here can read them. But corruptible code can read the votes before the barcodes are actually even scanned. Therefore, that machine can actually tabulate and have and hold our votes parked in a system before the barcodes are counted. Corruptible code is a scary, scary thing. We're headed in that direction if we're not already there. Can we not go there? Can we somehow feel like this is still America and try to get along and do things the right way and move forward? We're capable of so much more than this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. Cam Ashling.
She's not here, Mr. Chairman.
All right. George Balbona. Beg your pardon?
It'll take me 1 second.
Huh?
1 second, that's it. It's about a tree falling in a forest. I'm just going to read you about that. And it's about our vote. If a tree were to fall on an island where there were no human beings, would there be a sound? They then went on to answer the query. No. Sound is the sensation excited in the ear when the air or medium is set in motion. This seems to imply that the question is posed not from philosophical viewpoint, but from a scientific, purely scientific one. So, the technical answer, sound is vibration transmitted to our senses through the mechanism of the ear, recognize the sound only at our nerve centers. That is a audit. We're not getting it. A barcode is not our vote. It leaves obfuscation on the table. It does not show voter intent, which isn't that what voting's about, voter intent? Why I watch the chairman and Ed hiding behind paper as I'm speaking. That's respectful. So, yes? So let's just, I agree with the gentleman that just spoke. Let's have some respect. And the loquacious woman who ran, runs elections, that was a lot of talk. And I don't think she knows the basics of cybersecurity. I'll let someone else speak.
All right, do we have a Ted Metz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Ted Metz. I am a Cobb County voter. I am also the chairman of the Libertarian Party of Georgia. I did have Molly distribute our resolution to you. So I would like to read the resolution from the Libertarian Party of Georgia into the record. And this is entitled, A Resolution for Voting System Integrity. Whereas, until the advent of electronic voting systems, ballots cast in America had always been verifiable and recountable to the level of voter intent. Number 2, voter confidence in Georgia's current voting system has increasingly eroded, with constant news of problems with the electronic voting system's vulnerability to hacking and the lack of verifiable recounts to the voter intent level. Georgia's current Diebold DRE system was known to be unverifiable even before Secretary of State Kathy Cox implemented the system. Whereas concerned Georgia citizens have been advising the state on replacing the Diebold system since before it was even implemented and have not been stopped. whereas the cybersecurity experts from around the world, and especially around America and even in our room today, have warned us that there is no such thing as a safe, secure, unalterable electronic voting system, whereas Georgia is one of only 5 states still employing the unverifiable voting system, whereas to demonstrate that only one secure, safe form of hacking system is a human-readable paper document, be it known that the top U.S. agencies have implemented that policy, that all of their most top secret and important documents only exist on paper. Be it resolved that the Libertarian Party of Georgia only supports the voting system that is designated to be guaranteed to be secure and safe from hacking or alteration, produces a human-readable paper archive that is recountable to the level of voter intent, and does not use any computerized interface between the voter input and the production of the ballot. That's really what everyone here has been asking for, is a paper ballot that is archivable and can be recounted easily, even if it's done through an optical scanner. That's not a bad system. It's worked for 50 or 60 years. Why do we have to invest $150 million in a bond issue at 3% for 20 years is $50 million in interest? So right away, you're looking at a $200 million bill, and then on top of that, you're adding $10 to $15 million a year for the maintenance of the system. That's almost $500 million on a system that could easily be purchased for $30 million for the paper ballots. You're throwing away money at something that's going to be easily replaced or is hackable, it's not secure, and doesn't produce repeatable, verifiable transactions at the voter intent level for a recount. One of the things that no one has brought up, and it just shocks me, that these ballot marking devices that are being proposed print out on thermal paper. How many people here have ever tried to take their receipt back to the store that was printed on thermal paper, only to find out that when they take it out of their pocket, you couldn't read it? Thermal paper is not an archive. Thermal paper actually begins to degrade as soon as it's printed. Thermal paper is not an option for a recountable, archivable record of voter intent. The system being proposed with the ballot marking devices does impose a computerized piece of equipment that can be altered by a hacker. In other words, the program within the machine itself can be altered without anyone's knowledge to produce a result that is not verifiable to the voter intent level. So that's what we're asking for, is a paper hand-marked ballot that's read by an optical scanner that can maintain storage for years in case of a recount. It's cheap, it's easy, it's efficient. That's what we're asking for. So thank you very much for your time. You have our resolution on record.
Thank you, Mr. Metz.
I'll take questions.
See none.
Now I'd like to speak as a citizen of Georgia.
I'm sorry, you've already spoke as a citizen of Georgia, but we do appreciate it, Mr. Metz.
I would love to tell you about my experience with my own run with this past election, knowing that the paper ballots, the absentee ballots, were running about 3%, and the final recorded vote was only less than 1% for my spot for governor. There's absolutely no way to verify what the votes actually cast were. And that's the problem with any sort of electronic voting machine that does not capture a record of the marks put on a piece of paper by a human being. So that's, again, what we're asking for, is something that's verifiable to the voter level intent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Metz. Marilyn Marks. Ronnie Martin.
Good afternoon. Take me just a second to open up my stuff here. Okay. My name is Rhonda Martin. I'm a Fulton County voter and taxpayer. My background is that I'm a Georgia Tech alum. I have a bachelor's degree in math, a master's degree in operations research. I was a programmer of onboard computers of the Space Shuttle. I worked with the Department of Defense in evaluating their software testing practices for mission-critical systems, high school math teacher, and currently I am Executive Secretary of the Qatar Computing Research Institute Scientific Advisory Committee. I am here to speak against H.R. 316. The foundation of our democracy is the right of the people to vote, to have their votes counted, and when counted, to have their votes represent their intentions. It is imperative that the new voting system that you select provide voters with reliable means to make their voices heard on Election Day. Growing up in my family, there was no question. You voted. When there was an election, you voted. I was raised by my grandparents. My grandmother, neither one of them had a high school education, but my grandmother read the newspaper every day. My grandfather watched the evening news every day, every evening. He was a carpenter. He worked hard. When it came time to vote, my grandmother put on one of the 2 nice dresses she owned and went and voted. She would never tell my grandfather what she voted for or who she voted for because she didn't have to. There has never been a question in my mind, when it's time to vote, I'm going to go and do it. The use of direct recording electronic voting machines in Georgia calls into question whether or not the votes recorded accurately represent the will of the voters. Because of this, rather than going to the polls to vote, I voted using absentee ballots in November and December. I was concerned to learn that election officials often reject absentee ballots for frivolous reasons, so I held my breath until I saw that mine had been accepted and counted. I went on the website multiple times a day checking to see if my absentee ballot had been received and if it had been counted. In October, I decided to join the Coalition for Good Governance and became the lead plaintiff on a case suing the Secretary of State and others to require the fair application of absentee voting procedures, which employ paper ballots across all Georgia counties, providing voters with a reliable means to make their voices heard on Election Day. As a result, the court ordered officials to count many of the absentee ballots that had previously been cast aside. Soon after the votes were counted from the November election, the Coalition for Good Governance started examining the results posted on the Secretary of State's website, comparing these results with photos of the so-called recap tapes posted at local precincts on election night, and otherwise just looking around to make sure everything made sense. Coalition volunteers quickly noticed an anomaly in the lieutenant governor's race, and I know you've heard that referred to today. There was a huge drop in the votes cast for this race as opposed to the rest of the races on the ballot. I have a chart here that I expect everybody has seen that shows the huge drop for the lieutenant governor's race. A slight drop is expected as you go further down ballot. And as everybody always says, you can't force somebody to choose somebody for every race, and we understand that. But the lieutenant governor is the second race on the ballot, and it's the only one that had such a huge drop-off. This graph that I just held up shows the drop-off in 2018 compared to 2014 and 2010 midterm elections. If you look inside the data, which we have done, you will find that the drop-off only occurred on DRE voting machines. There was no similar drop-off for votes cast using hand-marked absentee paper ballots. Out of concern that something had gone wrong with the DREs, I once again joined the Coalition for Good Governance as a plaintiff, this time to sue the Secretary of State and others to contest the election results. As part of the detailed examination of the voting data at the precinct level across the state, statistics experts working with the coalition recently discovered that the drop-off in votes cast was more prevalent in precincts where large percentages of African Americans are registered to vote. Undervotes of the magnitude recorded in the November 2018 Lieutenant Governor's contest are without precedent in Georgia voting history. Votes were 4 times more likely to be missing when voters cast their ballots on DREs as opposed to using paper ballots, and were more likely than not to have been cast by African American voters. Within Fulton County, The correlation between the rate of undervotes and the percentage of registered voters who are African American was 0.557. The likelihood of such events occurring solely on the basis of chance is 1 in 10,000. Every effort should be made to investigate and determine whether outside intervention caused such a high rate of undervotes and whether African American voters were targeted in the process. I am concerned that with any continued use of touchscreen technology, these problems will persist. They can be avoided entirely, however, by providing voters with paper ballots where they hand mark their selections. With DREs with no paper trail, there was no way to really know if the recorded votes accurately represented the will of the voter. I understand that the ballot marking devices that are being considered will produce a paper ballot summary. Unfortunately, if that ballot summary includes a barcode, we remain in the situation of not knowing if the voter's intentions are being accurately captured and recorded. Let me be clear, ballot marking devices are not the answer. The paper trail that electronic ballot marking devices offer is not a paper trail that can be audited. I cannot verify barcodes, nor can I memorize the touchscreen ballot content at the level needed to verify a ballot card for accuracy and completeness. In fact, the limitations of human short-term memory make it impossible for voters to recognize errors and omissions that may have been introduced to their ballots prior to the verification step. If votes are cast on paper ballots hand-marked by the voters themselves, there is no need for a separate verification step, and issues of human limitations become moot. Computer scientists and cybersecurity experts agree that today the use of hand-marked paper ballots counted by optical scanners and audited in statistically valid audits is the best available method for conducting elections. I implore you to carefully consider and take to heart the recommendations of the experts. Thank you for your time, your consideration and service to the voters of Georgia. I know you have many issues you have to worry about, not just HR 316. Please take advantage of the resources offered to you by the experts who have spent their time and their lives studying the details of this technology. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Eric Robertson.
I'm probably standing between people and they're getting headed home, so I'll try to be brief. My name's Eric Robertson. I'm with the New Georgia Project, and rather than repeat what a lot of other speakers said much more eloquently than I would about the problems with Section 6, I just wanted to point out for those in terms of the no match, the questions of no match, that Florida has adopted a process of state level process to review no match voter registrations and to determine if the identity of the applicant could be verified through other records. And it's a state-based program rather than putting it on the registrar's office, which this legislation in its current form does. Additionally, there's no funding to ensure that county registrars are going to have sufficient staff and capacity to conduct the reviews that are mandated by this legislation. Section 6 also doesn't include any oversight by the Secretary of State or any other agency to ensure that this review is being conducted by the county registrars and that they're being done properly, and that there are no sanctions specified to a county registrar who fails to conduct the review. The only other aspects that weren't covered by previous speakers, well, they were covered briefly, but Section 11 and 12 are still going to allow for removing inactive voters who are not deceased, have not moved to another state, and it's going to maintain an unjust practice of purging voters that more than often is going to impact black voters and other voters of color. We're strongly opposed to removing eligible voters from the registration list simply on the grounds that they exercise their right not to vote. And we would strongly recommend that a process be included in the bill which would reinstate eligible voters' registration to the registration list who are removed for inactivity if they are still eligible to vote. For all these the issues that obviously have been raised today, we would ask that this committee table this bill to allow for more input from the public, to allow for these issues to be further considered. Thank you.
Noah Changa. All right. Bona Allen.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this evening. And the rest of the committee that's still here, thank you for staying and thank you for hearing us. My name is Bona Allen. I'm a resident of the DeKalb County. I agree with the vast majority of the speakers today, so I won't rehash any of that. What I will say is this bill is fraught with problems, as previously is previously set forth. Not the least of which is the issue with the voting machines and how votes are counted, tabulated, auditable. So I would urge you either to make drastic changes to this bill or to do away with it completely and vote it down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. April Biagani. April Biagani, if I'm pronouncing that right. Do we have an April in here? All right. Phyllis Blake.
Mr. Chairman and committee, I am Phyllis Blake, President of the Georgia State Conference of the NAACP. Protecting the integrity of the vote is in reality protecting democracy. The NAACP emerged 110 years ago as an anti-lynching organization committed to ensuring full participation in all aspects of society for communities of color. This has been a continuous fight and an often unfair fight, which now begins and ends with the unfettered access to the ballot box. In Georgia, we know this is not the case. In Georgia, we have documented numerous forms of voter suppression that have wrongly purged hundreds of thousands of voters from the polls. We have seen anti-democratic forces engage in practices designed to exploit the feeble state of the Voting Rights Act. We have seen our state's current governor participate in empowered disingenuous practices which stain our democracy, particularly the idea of all individuals being equal at the ballot box. We saw our governor in the role of Secretary of State move with all deliberate speed to dilute the political power of the Black community and additional communities of color. And today, we refuse to stand by and watch as elected officials seek to implement a bill which basically replaces the poll tax and Jim Crow as a slicker way to deny real democracy. HB 316 problematic in a number of ways, which the NAACP believes will have a disparate impact on communities of colors. We do not have to theorize about this. Our members and community experience voting machine-based irregularities and voter suppression tactics in the 2018 midterms. The NAACP filed numerous complaints with Secretary of State Brian Kemp's office. In several counties, we documented the experience of voters who saw machines switch their votes from Stacey Abrams to Brian Kemp in the race for governor. Others who went to vote were told they already voted. Others who faced power outages during early voting told to return to the polls later or stand in lines for hours to cast their votes. This is unacceptable for a modern nation or state which promotes the ideas of democracy to the rest of the world to codify slicker ways to keep real democracy just an illusion for many of us. HB 316 will not only continue our backward slide and return Georgia to Georgia of old, when stated sanctions, voter suppressions, and racism were the law. HB 316 takes us there in a slicker way without an ounce of accountability. A majority of Georgia voters want ballots supported by a paper trail, and it is the role of the politicians to give the people what they want, which is simply a true democracy. simply a fair fight. Thank you so very much for your attention.
We do have a question if you'd like to answer it. You do have a question. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
Ms. Turner?
Thank you. Thank you for your passionate testimony. I appreciate you being here today. Are you familiar, were you able to attend any of the Safe Commission meetings?
I attended the last one.
Just to the last one, did you have the opportunity, or maybe did you hear from somebody that attended the one in Macon when
No, I
a
didn't.
former Democratic Secretary of State, Kathy Cox, testified?
No, I was not at that one. Just the last one here, in I think the same room. Yeah.
Okay. She testified that day that hand-marked paper ballots saw a 20% dip in undervoting for the African-American community. If that is, and that was her testimony to the Safe Commission, I had a hard time believing it myself when I first heard it, so I asked for the transcript, and it was provided with me today, and I posted it online early on in the meeting today. Knowing that that is the case, that early on we saw African American communities disproportionately affected by undervoting, and they don't even know why, but they saw it statistically happen. Shouldn't we be doing everything we can to encourage and make sure that the African American vote is counted, and provide a voting system that allows them to do that?
Certainly, and we will certainly educate them on that. I did not know that the hand-marked ballots that was used by African Americans were 20% lower.
I saw a 20% dip.
And what year was this?
2001.
Okay. Well, I can assure you that we will educate our voters to make certain that they go to the polls as we did in the past election. We had a huge turnout, and we will continue the same practices as we did before.
So can we agree then that voter education is important?
Oh, for certain,
And it
yes, we
doesn't
do
matter
that.
which-
That's
doesn't
what
matter-
we're all about, yes.
So really, if there was a problem in the African American community being undervoted, using hand-marked paper ballots, can we apply that no matter what the ballot casting device would be that we choose?
No, I mean, why
So
would you?
you would rather-
What's your rationale for that? I don't understand.
Would you rather have a system that we know disenfranchises African Americans?
Oh, no, well, sir.
that's-
No, hand-marked ballot, that's what we want.
But
And that's
I-
it.
but-
No, sir, we can't go there. I am a retired software engineer, and I have knowledge to know, and especially with these flipping, it was two types of problems we were having. And one of them, they call it calibration. And I could understand that, where on the first screen, that touch screen, you can click on Stacy and you might get Brian, but on that last screen where you cast your ballot, and his name is on there, when the first screen worked and his name is on, that was a program and hacking problem. Somebody hacked the system. So no, I disagree with what you're saying.
You
It's no
disagree
doubt
with-
in my mind that we can train our voters to use this paper ballot.
So you don't think that there's a concern when the Democratic former Secretary of State testifies that the
In 2001.
Excuse me, ma'am. May I please?
Okay, sure,
Thank
go
you.
on.
Okay. Would you don't think that there's a problem with a 20% drop off in undervoting for the African American community using hand-marked paper ballots?
Certainly it was a problem in 2001, but I can assure you it won't be a problem in 2019 or 2020.
And how is that exactly? Just by trying to educate?
Oh, yeah, we do that all the time.
So
That's
why
what
did
the
it-
NAACP is all
if
about.
If that is true, then why did it happen
I
back
have
then?
no idea, sir. I have no idea. I didn't
Okay.
even know it had happened. And I don't know her reason. Did she have a reason?
In her testimony, she actually says she couldn't figure out why.
Oh, okay.
She couldn't figure out why.
And that was statewide.
She did a drill down in her testimony, and again, I posted this online earlier, but for anybody that wants to see it.
Okay.
In
I'll
her
look it up.
testimony, she said that in one county where there were African American precincts and white precincts, that the white precincts tended to have less of an undervote problem than the African American, to the tune of
one
20%.
county?
That
In
was
one-
her testimony, not
in
mine.
one county?
Yes, ma'am, in one
Okay.
county. But as we look at statistics, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
one county, it can be a valid sample size.
Sure.
So
Okay.
these are the things, I'm concerned about the African American vote as well.
Oh, okay.
So absolutely am. I want to make
Thank
sure
you.
that all votes are counted. I mean, that's, I think, the goal of everybody here today.
Well, it's very obvious that our communities, just listening to all of the testimony today, was targeted in this voter suppression. And that makes you feel real bad. When I think about my grandfather who fought in World War II, my daddy who fought in World War I, my grandfather, my father who fought in World War II, my husband who was in Vietnam, and my late husband, and my brother who's a retired lieutenant colonel, and also a grandson who loves this country, and he's now serving on the border. So it upsets me to no end, and to think of all of the marching we did for the state of Georgia to deliberately target us and target our communities. And boy, did we get a lot of complaints on Election Day, of long poll lines, of where places where the handicapped can really get into the polling places, where there was one small county where the machines were not even working. They had 3 machines, and they were not even working. And most of this has been reported to the Secretary of State office. It's documented. And we were obviously targeted. So we are going to fight this time. Continue to fight, I promise you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
May I ask a question? I've laid pretty well quiet and tried to moderate this.
Yes, sir.
What county do you, when you talked about all of these events, what county? Was this your home county?
Oh, no, my home county is here, Fulton County.
Where you talked about the
I have it all documented, and the secretary, and we email most of the complaints to the Secretary of State office. Now, the one where the voting machines were not working was, I think it was Dodge County. But we have, I'd be happy to share it with you, because we haven't gotten a response to a lot of the complaints that we submitted.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see that because, I live up in a more rural area. And, we had no complaints of anything that was run in the rural areas.
Oh, we had plenty of complaints.
And,
especially the rural areas in South Georgia. Go on, sir. I'm sorry.
My concern was that, we saw all of this, and I heard of all the politicalizing about the Secretary of State's office at that time. But I wondered to myself that it appeared to me to be most of the things that I was hearing about, not enough power cords in a polling place.
That happened too. We have the name of that one too.
Not enough machines there.
That's true.
But all of these things were the job of the local boards of election.
That's they pointing fingers at, one or the other. We get caught in between. Yes, sir.
Yeah, but I mean, those actual hand-on approach to running these elections, that's in the hands of the local boards of election.
Yes, sir. We've been told that.
And it was concerning to me that it seemed to be where most of the problems were, or where most of the accusations of voter suppression seemed to be in the areas that was the base of another political candidate, not Mr. Kemp.
Well, the Secretary of State office, isn't it the overseer of all of these other local county registration offices? Don't they train them? A lot of them were not even trained, some of the workers in there. There were some who were very well trained.
As I understand, the state elections office that's attached to the Secretary of State's office is the state office that passes down, but the local county boards of election are the ones that have the actual authority to run the campaigns. When somebody didn't show up, I'm from rural Georgia. And
what county?
I'm from Hart County. I represent Hart, Franklin, and Madison.
Sure, okay.
And when the election night was held, there's so much distrust because there'd been so much politicalizing between the two parties and the two candidates that folks in rural Georgia, myself included, when they tell me that a judge was called up to extend the voting hours from 7 to 10 o'clock, I personally looked at it as a disenfranchisement to my voters because they had an election official in DeKalb or Gwinnett or Fulton 1 that didn't have enough sense to show up and open up the polls at 7 o'clock with the power cords. But yet nobody ever said that the electronic voting machines had battery backup, so they didn't need a power cord for up to so many hours.
But that's training. And so who's responsible for
On
the
a-
training?
That would be your local boards of elections, as I understand it. But my people had a concern because what gives the folks out in Atlanta because of the malfeasance and inefficiency of the Board of Elections that they didn't have the proper, that they could
have
go to
no
a judge,
idea.
they get 3 more hours to vote.
I have no idea. I thought it was just local to
So,
the county. I have no idea,
You
sir.
know, I've heard for 2 days a lot of politicalizing here. I've heard the elections from November that seem to still go forward and a lot of the stuff that I'm hearing. I hear a lot of conspiracy theorists. I hear a lot of folks in here that don't like their elected officials because they don't trust us. Well, let me just tell you something. Every one of us that are elected to the General Assembly, we're here doing a job for the best that we can for the public. We want to be sure people go vote. When I hear the word disenfranchisement and I hear all of this stuff, I say, show me what they're talking about. Because as a citizen, all a citizen should have to do is to show their age, that they're of proper majority consent, they're a citizen, and show where they live so they're actually voting in the right precinct. To me, that's the qualifications to vote. I don't know anybody that's been turned down to be able to vote.
Well, have you heard of
So-
Representative Fleming's past legislature
So-
just would obviously disenfranchise, trying to cut back the voting days and some of the other thing that the young man mentioned. I mean, every year we have to come up here and fight to keep our
I'm
rights.
not sure if you're speaking about when they cut it to 3 weeks early voting from whatever it was before. A lot of that, I've hear people talk about the physical concerns of the counties. But all I heard from most of them was that before it was cut back to 3 weeks, that nobody was voting prior to that made it cost effective. So, you know, maybe the simplest process
If
is.
you would allow me, I would get with our national office
you
and,
will
and,
allow
and
me-
let me check
ma'am,
off all of the
If you would allow me
disenfranchisements.
to finish speaking, I
Yes,
would
sir.
appreciate
Go right
it.
ahead. Go ahead.
But I have concerns about this attitude that the election has not stopped since November the 6th. I have a concern about a lot of the stuff that's being put out there on social networking that I wonder to mind how accurate it really is, because I've been here almost 30 years. And I don't know that many people that I've ever seen that's ever tried to stop people from voting. You know, most of the people that I see here, they're here to do the right thing. I remember when we went along with Ms. Cox and Roy Barnes on the electronic voting machines, and I was one of those people at that time. I was not sold on it because I was concerned about technology and what might could be hacked or riddled because I wasn't that knowledgeable. But apparently everybody seems to love it because
No.
it got more people to
Why?
vote.
What would it?
We had
Oh
more
my
people
God!
that
I
started
didn't like
voting.
it. I didn't like it.
So I'm not arguing with that point, but it seemed to me to be more people, at least all the polls and the phone calls seem to say, we like these machine voting. So, you know, that
Are
being
you
said,
I have no comments.
no. wouldn't
None
expect you
whatsoever.
to.
I just continue to fight for our people
but
and those disenfranchised, poor
And
white
let-
as well
and
as
let
blacks.
me tell you something. Everybody I think that's elected in this General Assembly will fight for every poor, every disenfranchised, no matter what your race or your nationality is. I really do.
Oh, okay.
So
you can do that starting by
No
not
matter-
voting for 316.
no
That
matter
would be a
what-
good way.
What we will do is this committee is going to meet tomorrow. And that's what this committee process is about. We've had 2 days of hearings. I think everybody has had an opportunity to be heard. So the next step is we'll move into the committee process tomorrow, and if the members of the subcommittee wish to pass it, amend it, or defeat it, that'll be the committee process. Then it will move forward.
Okay, well, thank you for the
But-
opportunity to
but
speak,
I
and
like-
I'm sorry if I got a little emotional, but we have been through a whole lot, and that
You know.
last election was one of the worst.
Yeah.
So I do apologize for my emotional
You have
outburst,
you
and
have
I
no
hope
need
I
to
can answer your
apologize.
question.
You have no need to apologize, because that's your right to be heard.
Thank you.
And I do
appreciate it.
appreciate you being here and I appreciate everybody here. But I just want to make a point that members of the General Assembly, we're up here to try to do the right thing. We all come from different districts, but we're all up here to represent
Okay, you're speaking
our
for yourself,
constituents.
sir, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Everybody's not looking out for our best interests, and we know that. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for
God
coming.
bless.
Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting, tomorrow we'll move on.
May I please, 20 seconds. District 28. District 28. It's part of Pickens County, it's part of Habersham County, and I believe all of Banks County, right?
Pickens County is not in that district.
I'm
That
sorry.
district will be part of Habersham, Stevens, and Banks.
Stevens, thank you. I knew that was wrong. So, some people were inappropriately assigned to that district. There have been, it's an all-Republican primary that was thrown out by a judge from the May 22 primary. Then there was a vote in December that was also thrown out, and Secretary of State Raffensperger launched a voter fraud investigation in which all of the mishaps were actually the fault of elections officials that would be clearly defined as elections fraud, not voter fraud. So I agree. I think all of you guys are up here trying to do the right thing. But I think she was just trying to make some really good points.
And she made her points, and I wanted to call, I asked her the question, and I appreciate her comments.
Okay, but I haven't seen you point your finger like you did at her for about 8 times.
Well, I'm gonna point my finger at you right now,
Okay.
since I live next to the 28th district.
Good. So
I'm familiar,
you're
so
familiar
I can
with
tell you
that.
what happened.
But see, that was a point I forgot to make earlier.
What
Greg-
happened in Habersham Banks in the 28th district? The first was a mistake of the elections officials.
Correct.
The second one might be possibly considered voter fraud, because when people who live outside the district that come into the district and claim a different place of location of residence, could possibly be construed as voter fraud.
Okay, can you define the 30-day rule, please? Because that is written into the piece, that's in both the myadc.com that I have on my
understand.
phone, and it's in
I
print.
understand the 30-day rule, but since this is pending a case up there, then you need to speak to those folks up there, because the judge called some of them in, and that's the reason they have ordered another election.
Well, I know, yeah. I don't understand the 30-day rule. They said those people were
And
being...
to me, this is one of the reasons that it's so important that we tend to this voting to be sure voting is done correctly.
Right.
Because I think a lot of people forget the delightful lady that spoke about everybody's rights. She's absolutely correct.
Yes.
Because Georgia
Yes.
had such a notorious reputation in decades long since gone that they truly did disenfranchise all voters at that time when
Right.
it was machine run.
We've come a long ways.
We've come a long way.
And we can go
and
further.
it's to the benefit of everybody, not just those that are elected, but to the citizens of Georgia, to be sure that the voting is both correct and lawful, and that we put those things into place to ensure that.
But would it be voter fraud if someone moved out of the district unknowingly, because that line could be, let's say, staggered, using the Chattahoochee for an example?
Right.
Okay? They move, But they think, oh wait, I only moved 27 days ago, 22 days, so I need to go back and vote. I still belong in that district.
All right.
Actually, they moved 33 days ago. So they just committed voter fraud unknowingly. I see what you're saying. I see both sides of it.
All right.
But in the paper and in the online, it is simply represented as Secretary of State Raffensperger launches voter fraud investigation. Excuse me.
And your point, because he has, I understand that they have launched an investigation.
Right.
On this last scenario is voter
Just
fraud.
like Secretary of State Kemp did one day before he stepped down, when he received information that went through the proper protocols all the way up to Winky Lee and back, and then it was forwarded over to the Secretary of State office. He sat on it after he met with President Trump down in Southeast Georgia for a rally. Then he announced that he was launching a voter fraud investigation against the Democratic National Party or the Democratic Party of Georgia. Because the Democratic Party of Georgia reported, sir, Mr. Kemp, you left the voter rolls exposed, and Winky Lee validated that. That's not voter fraud. That's irresponsibility on the part of an official who's in charge of the voter rolls. So, in the court of public opinion, I think that investigation swayed many of votes.
I have no idea. I mean,
and yes,
Can I help you out?
yes.
He is making a great point about Dan Gasaway and his lawsuit, and really the main point of what was important, and I actually ran some of the numbers in Habersham County for this. The point is the DREs showed the incorrect ballot in District 28 and District 10. This was a machine error. This is something that was already proven, and Dan Gasaway won that lawsuit. And that was the one that Brian Kemp decided to grant him a redo. So that is the key point of that, is that was a machine error. And then in Doraville, Steffi Kuntz, who's on city council, she was given the incorrect ballot on a DRE in Doraville, the same circumstance of cross precincts here. So I just wanted to help him out and kind of put that in there, that the real problem that if you want to bring up Dan Gasaway's case and things like that is that machine errors were really the issue, not voter fraud and not anything
Well,
like that. That's a
I'm
machine error.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up or enhance anything. I was answering this question about the gasaway. And quite frankly, that's got nothing to do with this hearing. So,
That's why I brought up the machine error, sir.
thank you.
Thank you.
Voter fraud or a
All right.
machine error.
We have 3 committee members that wish it to be heard. Mr. Trammell first. You're passing? Mr. Goulet.
Yeah, I just want to make one statement about the Gasaway. It wasn't a machine error. Being on the Board of Elections, those lines are drawn and audited by the local boards of elections. I believe that those people were put into the wrong districts by human error. It translates into a machine error, but it starts with a human error. Just want to clarify that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jim, may I simply, if people are allowed to vote,
Mr. Gravely.
would the voter roll not be incorrect? There are officials that are supposed to verify through your IDs and your credentials that you're permitted to vote in that precinct. Am I wrong? So I don't understand why the people were deemed
I just wanted to
fraudulent.
I want to say that, number one, I appreciate all of you. I mean, that's why I've been trying to sit here and listen. I appreciate the passion. But I wanted to comment really briefly on something that was spoken earlier regarding the law enforcement that's here, the troopers and the Capitol Police. They're asked to be here. And a lot of times when committee hearings get passionate and when there's a lot of very passionate feelings on both sides of an issue, they're here to protect everybody in the room. And I would have no doubt that they would protect everyone in this room. They're not here to intimidate anybody. And I'm glad that all of you came and spoke with the passion, whether you yelled at us, whether you had whatever it was that you said, I appreciate you doing that. I appreciate you taking time away from your jobs, away from your families, away from your commitments to be here and say what you did. But I also want to make sure that these officers in the back, they're here to keep the peace, and they're here to protect everyone in this room, not us over y'all or y'all over us, everybody. And I appreciate them being here and standing there the way they've done. And I think we owe them a round of applause because they haven't intimidated anybody. But I want to say thank you guys for doing that. And there is a stark contrast from the way things used to be in this state, because I see black, I see white, I see male, I see female officers back there. And they're just doing their job. They're doing what they were asked to do. And ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate y'all being here. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I haven't had a chance to speak yet, and I was on the list. I didn't know if you were holding me for tomorrow.
I'm sorry, and you are?
Garland Favorito. I gave you a request this morning, and we chatted.
All right. 5 minutes?
I requested 20 this morning, I think. I'm going to be as fast as I possibly can. There's a lot of misinformation and questions I want to try to clear up. I've got two handouts.
If you're going to make 20 minutes, you may be talking to yourself.
Okay.
So
Okay.
go right ahead.
I'll go as fast as I possibly can, but we haven't had a chance to present the counter evidence to 2 hours of hearings. I know we've had a lot of public comments, but I've got two different handouts I think you have, and I would like to just simply ask you, and Ted is passing them out if you don't already have them. I'm going to start with this handout. We had talked about trust. I wanted to mention to you that back in 2001, first of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. You and I go back to 2006, and I do remember when you actually had you cast a deciding vote to allow House Bill 790 to go forward out of this committee 13 years ago. And we really appreciate you doing that. If that bill had passed the legislature, we would not be here today, and not many people know that. Back in 2000, I'm sorry, it's cutting out. Back in 2001, Georgia had a great law. It was called, it said such voting systems that we look at should be required to have an independent audit trail of each vote cast. In 2002, the legislature removed the law. And our concern is that that's what's going to happen again. That cleared the way for unverifiable voting in Georgia, which we believe have disenfranchised us. And I'm sorry to use that word, but the machines cannot be verified or audited. Now, I heard today several times that we've never had any problems with the machines. So these are the Safe Commission recommendations that we made, and I would like to give this copy for the record. And I spoke for 15 minutes at the Safe Commission on existing problems that the machines had. I will bring you the documentation to tomorrow, but we've had dozens of problems of lost votes, invalid votes, and all sorts of different kinds of problems that have impacted for billions of dollars in SPLOS and all kinds of different controversial elections. So I want to leave this with you. This is our recommendations for the Safe Commission. None of them are in this bill. And the elections directors have told us, some of the ones have even testified that we had a lot of good information that possibly should have been included because we had the legislative recommendations as well. So I'm going to move on to what I think is important that we've not talked about. The second slide that you've got talks about the different types of ballot marking devices. There are three different kinds. One is what we call are totally unverifiable because they have the votes in barcodes. Another type has barcodes, but the votes are not in them. They carry something like general election data and precinct ID, that sort of thing. And the third one is a completely clear ballot, which just has the alignment marks on it. There's no code in those alignments. So therefore, you cannot hack a clear ballot. So that's the distinguishing factor when you're looking at these, and these are the ballots that the people prefer. Going to the third slide really quickly. Everything from the back, whether you're doing hand-marked paper ballots or ballot marking devices, is exactly the same. The scanners can check for overvotes. So they can perform the same functions on a hand-marked paper ballot solution versus a ballot marking device. Same thing. I want to show you how the system in Georgia, Georgia procedures, Georgia machines can be hacked without detection by the county election officials. Now, we keep saying that these, we've never had any problems. You wouldn't know. If the system was hacked, you would not know. So if you have this diagram, please follow along just for a minute. Here's a voting machine. This could be a ballot marker, it could be a DRE. We'll take DRE for example. It's programmed with memory cards that come from the GEM server and the county database. This voting machine is not connected to the internet, and it is secured by the county elections officials. However, it can be hacked through Georgia procedures without detection. The way that happens is as I think Ms. Shackelford testified, the GEMS server that the counties use was prepped from a central source. We operate with a single point of attack in Georgia. We're one of the only states in which you compromise the central server. You can compromise any election, any machine in the state of Georgia. That is a process that's going to stay in place for the new system in HB 316. There's nothing in the bill that will mitigate this risk, which is one of the concerns and one of the recommendations that we had. Very concerned about that, but because we know that in 2017 or 18, just before a lawsuit was filed, all the data was destroyed because it had been exposed, and we found out that that exposure dated back to 2005. So the central ballot preparation server, the ballot building server, was exposed to the internet from 2005 on. That allowed anybody to come in and put malware on the machine without detection. So when the county officials say that we have no problems, you wouldn't know. There's no way for the county officials, there's no way for anyone in the state to know if a hack occurred or not. And that's one of the concerns that we have with electronic voting. And I am a 40-year IT professional, and I've been looking at this for 16 years as part of Voter GA, which is nonpartisan, nonprofit. I want to move to another speaker mentioned the scanning ballot. We believe this is vendor terminology that was inserted into the bill last year when a lot of the same language existed at SB 403. The scanning ballot is not a real ballot. It is just simply selections on a piece of paper with barcodes on it. Votes are typically embedded in the barcodes in many of these machines. Some are not. So we think that this type of ballot should be outlawed. It should not be legalized in Georgia. I'm going to give you the amendments exactly to where we could prevent that from happening. Finally, we mentioned the lieutenant governor's race. There was 40,000 votes about 140,000 votes lost in this particular race. I'm not going to talk about this because it's already been talked about, but I just do want to point out, for example, as someone said, all of the undervotes are in the electronic voting category. They're not in mail-ins. The mail-ins are consistent throughout the board, all the way down from the governor's race through down to agriculture and so on. There is no issue in mail-in, verifiable mail-in votes. It's only in the electronic votes. That race could have been hacked using, and we don't know for sure, we know the votes are lost. It could have been hacked using this procedure. It'd be very simple to take this DRE or a ballot marking device and simply exclude that race on certain counties and certain precincts. That's not that difficult a programming job to do, and you could actually achieve that even if you were a bad actor, even with a new ballot marking system. So those are things that I think you really, really need to know. So I'm going to move to the second slide, and I just have 3 more things I want you to know very quickly.
I think you have about 4 minutes left. It's almost
I can
5
do
o'clock.
it. I can do it in 4. I think I can do that in 4
Thank you.
minutes. Georgia Tech study. It's in the study that Dr. DeMillo did is in your list that I sent you like 3 days ago. That link in number 2 is that I'm operating off of this particular set of papers. It's the first set I gave you. The issues with the bill. It requires the state to purchase a new type of ballot marking system. It's against best practice. It's not recommended by any of the cybersecurity experts. You've already heard that. But this is going to require the state to purchase it. And against all the recommendations of everybody we've already heard from, you've talked about. It also allows for the barcodes to have the votes embedded in them. And I'll show you how the amendment that you can put on to change this. And it's going to cost Georgians an extra $80 to $100 million. You have the spreadsheet. I think you've already got another one. An extra 80 to 100 million upfront cost, but it also is going to cost a good 5 to 10, possibly even 15 million annually, ongoing expenses. So if you map all that out, and then on your existing bond, and then you add on top of that the interest alone that you are paying, $50 million to borrow $250 million for the 150 for the next 20 years, that interest alone would pay for the hand-marked ballot solution. Forget all the capital. So it doesn't make business sense, particularly if you're supposed to be a fiscal conservative. I'm not really understanding that. There's no definition of the audit in this bill, and therefore that we can't rely on the audit procedures that are there. It legalizes the scanning ballot. It does not take into consideration the single point of attack, how to mitigate that, how to do recounts on tabulators. A tabulator could be counting incorrectly during a recount, and there's no way you would ever know. It does not allow public inspection of the ballots. The public can never see the ballots to verify that the machine's actually counted correctly. So just to offer several amendments, which should actually be friendly amendments, but apparently they're not going to be. If you look on the second page of that last report, all we have to do is add 2 words, human readable, to line 37. I'm on the last slide. 2 words would solve on lines 36 and 38 of the bill. Add human readable to the definition. That way you can ensure that you are having verifiable elections, at least reasonably verifiable, and you're not repeating the same thing that we did in 2001, which we believe that we disenfranchised the people. The second one, requiring the state to buy a type of system that the experts say we shouldn't be buying. Why do we have to require the state to do that? Why do we have to require that? That can be done by the Secretary of State or the RFP. You can strike Section 18. Finally, the third one, all you have to do is modify the definition of a scanning ballot. A scanning ballot should be a full-face ballot, and it should be of the same style as the appearance as the official ballot. It's very simple, and this is what most of the elections directors wanted that I heard. So those 3 things, incredibly simple as they are, would go a long way to make this bill a little bit more palatable to the people who have been testifying for days. Now, it doesn't solve all 10 of the problems that we have here, but it at least solves a lot of them. And you're in a really difficult position to try to justify this kind of expenditure for deficient equipment to your constituents. I don't really know how you're going to do that as supposedly conservatives. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank each and every one for taking time to come for the last 2 days. To the committee members, we've taken testimony. I want you to check your emails. We will probably have a meeting tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock in this room. Mr. Trammell, can you notify any members that you'd like to have, committee members, to be sure your subcommittee members are going to be here? And Mr. Gravely, would you touch base sure the other committee members that may be here in the morning so that we can move forward with this? And I will see y'all at 8 o'clock in the morning. Thank you so much.